We know what they fed into it. It's wild that they can get away with it, recreating things this closely and people not being like, hey, that's clearly copyright infringement. Yeah. One of the issues is people go, oh, but you asked for Infinity War, so that's your fault. But through the work that I was doing with the prompting and stuff like that, and working a little bit with Gary Marcus, who's an AI expert, we were able to get it down to one word, which is just screenshot. Sam Altman talks about replacing the median human, which is crazy. It's going to have to come from different areas, different solutions, regulation, legislation, lawsuits. It's kind of, you have to tackle it from all these different angles to sort of beat it into submission and make it something that's ethical and safe and respects people's rights and property and isn't going to upend the economy. Once something gets easy, it's like, okay, what's the next thing? Because I don't want everything to be easy, because then you're not growing. The idea with 3D, from my standpoint, it's a means to an end for me. I only take it as far in 3D as I need to be able to set me up for success in Photoshop. Like, Photoshop is the finishing point for everything. Part of what I love about doing this type of work is finding unique hacks for like novel solutions for stuff where I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to accomplish. As a concept artist in the film industry, or any industry really, you're a problem solver first and foremost. The production doesn't care if you get a pretty image for your portfolio, as long as the image solves the problem it sets out to solve.
People have to remember, like, there is a focal point. Remember, you want the viewer to look at a place. You don't want to go, where am I supposed to look? Especially when it's on the screen for 2 seconds. It's like, you have to make your point. It has to come across real fast. Welcome to another episode of the ATMO experience. So we're here. We have Reid Southen. It's Southen. I keep on wanting to call you Southern for some reason.
it's Southen, but everybody says it different. It's cool.
Oh, so Southen. All right, cool.
Yeah.
So you are a senior concept artist and map painter, and you've worked in the film. Have you worked in games?
You know, I've done a little bit of like indie game stuff very, very early in my career, and I don't think anything ever came of it. And it was just like illustration stuff. So pretty much just movies. Yeah.
Cool. And so you've been in the industry for a long time. You've worked on, you've worked at the Marvel Studios, 20th Century Fox, DC Studios, Sony Pictures, et cetera, et cetera. You've worked on The Matrix Resurrections, Hunger Games, Jupiter Ascending, Transformers, Alien, all those big old movies. Your work is badass. So I'm excited to check it out. You've also are a big voice against AI, which is a huge topic these days.
Takes up most of my time right now, actually, believe it or not.
I'm really more so than actually making art.
Well, there's not a lot of work going around now. So, I'm doing personal work and stuff like that. And there is some work that I'm doing, but my free time is generally sort of doing, activism and advocacy and talking to the media and other people and stuff like that, and pushing, for more people understanding what's going on with AI and, change.
Yeah, you've definitely had a bunch of viral posts going around that we'll definitely touch on.
Sure.
So let's get into your life of how you got into this. Were you, where are you from? Did you learn art at an early age? What's your life like? What's the deal?
So I've drawn since I was like a little kid, but I never really took it seriously. I probably started, like a lot of kids, like drawing Pokemon characters and stuff like that. I did a lot of Dragon Ball Z stuff when I was little. And then in high school, probably around my junior year, I decided, I think I might want to pursue art. I always wanted to be a writer, but I always loved drawing and painting and stuff like that too. And I'm a little bit too impatient for writing, I think. I still want to, but so I kind of pivoted because, doing visual media stuff, it's more of an immediate thing. And so it's like, you might have a result there and not have to wait, 6 months to write a story. So I pivoted and started doing more artwork in high school and took some additional art classes. And I took a semester off after I graduated high school and applied to the College of Creative Studies in Detroit, Michigan.
Smart move.
Yeah, I was nervous about it initially, but I was like, I don't think my portfolio is up to snuff to get in. And it was actually shortly after that they stopped requiring portfolios for getting in there. Headphone just fell out. They stopped requiring it, but so I put the extra time and effort in, and it paid off. I ended up getting a small scholarship, which helped quite a bit to get in there. And so I was there in the illustration department for 2.5 years, maybe 3. Okay. Basically, I started there, and it got to the point where the money was kind of running out a little bit, and I didn't want to take out a student loan. Mm-hmm. And the scholarship wasn't really covering it. And then it was really early days for digital art back then too. And so when I dropped out, it was about 2009, end of 2009. And at that point, the school hadn't transitioned yet into a lot of more digital media stuff and entertainment art type stuff. So I wasn't really getting what I needed out of the classes anymore. And the money was simultaneously kind of running out at the same time. And so I was like, and from what I've talked to people about, you don't really need your diploma. You don't need to graduate. Nobody really talks about it or cares. Yeah. And that turned out to be true. You
could be 12 years old and get a job if you're a badass. So
yeah, well, in the 15 years since then, no one's ever asked me in terms of the interview or job process where I went to school or if I have a degree or anything like that. It just never come up other than like casual conversation. So it turns out, your portfolio is king. Also, who you know. Yeah. But It was a good move. It made it so I didn't really go into debt from school, which a lot of people I know 15 years on are still paying off those student loans. And so I got extremely lucky. I sort of was really doing the digital art thing. In like 2006 is when I got, I think, my first tablet and really started into that. And then started art school this January of 2007. So like it was real quick, but I was really heavily into the digital art stuff, and that really wasn't going on in the traditional illustration department stuff yet. And so I was already kind of one step ahead of what was going on at the school and one step ahead of a lot of people at the school, but behind a lot of the people that you see online. So I was kind of trying to catch up to them, but I was kind of always one step ahead in the digital stuff in school, but I was also consistently like one step behind in the traditional stuff, which was a little bit of a struggle. And that's where I got my foundations and stuff, which I'm really grateful for. But it's also to the point nowadays where if you can self-teach and you know where resources are and where to look, you don't even really need art school anymore. It's really about, if you can push yourself, if you need a little bit of structure, maybe take a course, for a lot cheaper than art school, but like you can absolutely do it without it. As long as you network and as long as your work is good, it'll work.
Yeah, the thing I like about having an actual teacher is that they'll be straightforward with you, and so you can get that quick exponential growth. So, if you're teaching yourself, you're kind of like, well, how do I see what's wrong, right? Where you can have.
Oh yeah, it's not for everyone. Like I tell people all the time, like one of the main benefits I got out of going to art school for the time that I did was getting the ability to teach myself. You learn the thought processes of how to approach your work and how to self-critique. Mm-hmm. We're like, what's wrong with this? And even if you're not sure, you kind of go through this process of what's working, what's not working, and you can kind of figure that out. And that's something that not everybody can do. Yeah. And, art school is kind of what led me to understand that process a little bit more. And so it gave me the tools to go and figure that stuff outside of art school. I'm someone who definitely benefits from a little bit more structure like that to start, and then I can kind of take it and run. Mm-hmm. Some people need structure throughout, and some people can self-structure. Everyone comes at it a little bit different, especially because so many artists have ADHD and stuff like that. It can be a real struggle. But yeah, it's definitely a bigger uphill battle if you do it solo, but you'll save $150,000. If not more, depending on where you're at.
Well, that's why I'm a huge advocate of trade schools, because it's like, what is the point of learning all those other topics when you're literally not going to use any of it? Like in our industry, like I don't need to go in for history or engineering or I mean, like programming. I learned some programming because our industry actually, like, it's good to know some code, but I don't actually use it so much. I kind of forgot most of it, but at least I'm familiar and I can have a conversation with someone about it, right? But everything else, like I don't even do biology. It's just, what is the point wasting my money and time when I could just be focusing on my skill that would make me money?
I remember at art school, they had a math class and I was like, who's that for?
Exactly.
It's like you had to squeeze it in there. And of course it costs the same as all the art classes. And so what a lot of people would do is they would go and take the math class in like community college and then transfer it over, take it for $300 as opposed to $3,000.
Yeah. No, you have to go to university, giant scam. I think people are starting to wake up to it, or at least do it in a more intelligent way, instead of just going, without thinking about it.
It depends on what you're going for. There are certain highly technical things that having that structure is really important. What I always tell people nowadays who are in art school and are not certain or having a hard time affording it, scholarships, whatever, I tell them, like, once you feel like you've gotten what you need out of it, don't be afraid to cut and run.
Yeah.
Because you can save the money. Like, that's what I did essentially. I started late and I took less classes per semester than a full load was by one class, just because it was like diving into the deep end and I had a job and stuff. So, you get to the point where you're like, am I getting a lot out of this still? And can I figure this out on my own? Now that I have all my fundamentals after the first year or two, and then it's like elective classes and more specific things that you're getting into, those are all important and are really beneficial. But you have to ask yourself, is it worth the cost? And you go on YouTube, there's a million different sites that have courses. It's like, if you get to that point where you can figure out how to self-teach, you can take what you have and go, and no one's gonna fault you for it, and no one's ever gonna really ask, did you graduate? Because if your work is good enough, that's really all.
Start applying for jobs for sure. Totally, start applying. Don't be afraid, especially even when they say, "Oh, we're looking for senior." Who cares? Just apply. Start the relationships. You
put yourself out there. It's the old Wayne Gretzky quote: "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." I'm not a sports guy, but I love that quote. And I think about it all the time because it's true. So many people, it's like, oh, I'm working on my portfolio. I'm not ready to submit to, studios or whatever. And I'm like, you're never going to feel ready.
Yeah.
I never feel ready when I land a new film gig. You know what I mean? Like, it gets easier over time, but I always feel like I'm being thrown in the deep end every time I start a new job. It's just the anxiety of not knowing what's coming and not knowing if it's going to work out, not knowing if you're going to gel with a production designer and art directors and stuff like that. Like, there is an anxiety there pretty much every time, and then it gets easier and you figure it out. But if you don't throw yourself into the deep end from time to time and really kind of, give it a shot, it'll never happen.
Yeah. What was that?
I was going to say the first Lightbox in 2019, I was doing a portfolio review with my friend Robbie Trevino with a girl, and I asked her where she'd applied or where she'd worked because her portfolio was really, really good. And she's like, oh, I'm still working my portfolio. I haven't applied anywhere yet. And I'm like, you're doing industry quality work. Like, you're past that. Like, you should have already had a job somewhere. Like, don't sit on it. You could have been working a year ago. You know what I mean? Like, and I think a lot of people they're too nervous to go for it, and you have to, and try not to take those rejections personally, because sometimes when someone's looking at portfolios, they're going through real fast, and sometimes something just doesn't spark, and other times it does.
Yeah, that's one thing that Noman helped me with for portfolio reviews. And I remember to not ever talk shit about your own work. Just show it to the person, and that's it. And I remember even just this one teacher, it stuck with me because I got in trouble for it. And she's like, I don't want anyone to come up to the room, up to the wall and say, it's not that great. Here it is, da, da, da. And she warned us. And of course it came out of my mouth. And then she's like, you got an F, go sit back down. It's like, what? So
it's actually really smart though, because you don't, when you're presenting your work, you don't want to immediately point out the flaws.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff they may not have really cared about or noticed until you said it, and then they zero in.
Yeah, our work is very personal too, and that's the thing. Like, you're going on dailies and stuff, and your heart is pumping like through your chest. Like, what are they going to say about it? Am I going to be embarrassed? Like, they're going to talk shit about me. What are my colleagues going to think about me? Oh God, you're not that good. Why are you even here? Like, no one's thinking that because they're just as nervous as you are. So
I deal with the imposter syndrome thing constantly.
Oh,
every time I show up somewhere. Well, especially because, I'm working on films and stuff, but I live in Michigan. I travel for jobs when I need to. Sometimes you got to be on location, and I do travel for that, but I've never had to move out to California. I've never been forced to do that in order to get the work. And so I've been very fortunate in that sense, where I can work in this industry and not have to live with California prices, and housing and stuff like that. But also it just feeds the imposter syndrome. It's like, why are they hiring me? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so every time I start a new gig, it's like, are they going to find me out this time or what? And then it goes fine. And you're like, okay.
Yeah. I switched from film, TV to games. And that was like, okay, here we go. It's a whole different experience, different language, different world. And you just kind of just do it because you just got to do it, Like, don't be afraid to go to other industries. Because right now, especially in our field, it's just hell. Like everyone, people haven't had work for a year, I've seen. And these are good artists. And, I've had people mention like, well, maybe it's just because they're just not good enough. I'm like, no. These are super experienced people. Like they are definitely, it's just not that.
I know people that have been doing this a lot longer than I have. I've been in film for 15 years. I know people that have been doing it 20, 25, 30 years, and they're hard up for work too. And they're a hell of a lot better than I am at it. You know what I mean? So it's kind of across the board. Things are real shaky right now, both games and film and TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, hopefully things start turning around, but I mean, I'm very bearish on the state of the world economy in general. So I can't imagine that if being a positive for with our industry. Like so, but I do see a lot of jobs popping up on LinkedIn, like way more now, all the time. Like every day I see a new job post in the
It'll
film
bounce
TV.
back and level out. The question is where and when.
Yes.
How much is it going to level out and how long is that going to take? It's not going to boom back to what it was, I don't think, both in terms of
I think it's going to be tougher.
People are consuming things differently. So, the streaming services, people aren't going to the movie theaters as much. And then games, they overhired during COVID and people are losing their jobs, AI stuff. So there's so many factors right now that are affecting entertainment as a whole. It's really hard to say what the landscape might be 6 months or a year from now. You know what I mean? So I got to hold out hope. Work has been hard to come by. I've been getting a little bit more work this year than I would say I was getting last year, but it's still not really bounced back. So it's, kind of, holding down the fort and hoping help comes. Most people I've been talking to in the industry seem outside of concept art and stuff like that, people that are a little bit more embedded, have been talking about how people are optimistic and things look like they're kind of firing back up soon, with IATSE coming to their agreement, which is not good for artists in terms of the AI stuff, but is good for a lot of the other trades. It looks like the gears might start spinning again soon, which would be good. The question is how many jobs are there going to be once that starts up? It could take a year before things are sort of back to where they were, if they even get there. But, I'm hopeful, the limitations with AI and stuff like that are pretty prevalent, but obviously there's a lot of that going on and, we'll see, I suppose.
I have a theory. Well, not really theory, but I just assume that when the job or when the industry comes back to life, like you said, it's not going to be the same as last time. And I think that's mostly just going to be probably harder to break in, more like pickier on who they're going to hire. And I'm just not so sure about if the pay is going to be said. Maybe the pay would be better since it's tougher competition. But I just don't know about. Yeah. I have a sense it might not. Maybe later. But because during COVID, they had that huge uptick. Everyone was getting hired, even juniors, new ones. It didn't care who it was. Just everyone's getting hired. And now I think it's just going to be, they're going to be, like, studios are closing everywhere. Access just closed down, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So
VisFX studios, you know what I mean? Like a lot, especially VisFX studios, but animation studios too. Like companies that, kind of ride that line all the time, no matter what, how well they're doing or whatever. And so it's really nerve-wracking. And like one of my biggest concerns is that a lot of other people are concerned about as well is that, like, yeah, the work might come back, but with AI specifically, what happens when your art department of 10 artists is 4 artists and everyone's required to do 3 times as much work, right? And so I don't really foresee people getting paid more to do that. I foresee them getting paid either the same or less. I don't worry about prompters and people of that nature really sort of taking jobs because they lack the foundation and the fundamentals and frequently the skill sets. if they already have the skills to be able to address things in a production environment, then AI to them is something that's coming into their life, not something that has changed their life that they're using then to get into the industry, right? They just don't have those skill sets. And not that they can't develop them, they just don't have the understanding that artists do. But if artists start taking these jobs and are being forced to use AI to pick up the slack, which is already happening in game studios, for sure. I'm not so sure about film, how that's really working, because it's been real slow. But you know, when people are forced to use AI to pick up that slack, I just don't see it working out where people get paid any more to do that work. You're just going to get paid the same and be expected to do more because it's more efficient. And, you know, I think I worry about productions becoming more samey than they are currently. People complain about originality and how all the movies look the same. And I don't see how AI fixes that. I see it making it worse.
Yeah, there's no soul in it. So
ignore all the ethics, ignore the data set stuff, ignore the legal stuff. Think about it just as it is. And it can only remix things that have been fed into it. And you see all these things, and every now and then you may see something that's kind of interesting that comes out of it. But a lot of it's just the samey sort of stuff and like techie things, and just like you've seen it all. You really have. And so I don't think the way to forward with originality is leaning into something that can only remix previous things. You're not coming out with novel stuff. You're getting Wes Anderson Star Wars, and and there are people doing interesting things with it. I can't deny the fact that there are some people that are really pushing the limits of it, but those are people that are combining it with other tools and techniques.
Yeah.
And again, there's the whole ethics thing, and I don't agree with that in its current state, but there are interesting things that people are doing. I just don't see it being this creative renaissance that everyone sort of thinks it's going to be. I think it's going to hurt creativity more than anything, especially when upcoming and novice artists are leaning into AI as a crutch. That's one of my biggest concerns, is that people that go, oh, I have a hard time with anatomy, AI will fix it for me.
Yeah.
You know, or I'm having a hard time with the lighting, or I don't really understand this, or perspective's a little tough. And it's just kind of offloading certain tasks to that. And like, as artists who understand these things, we even get lazy. Yeah. You know, I don't draw stuff in perspective as much as I used to because I use 3D for it. And that's a whole different skill set and process and stuff. But you do atrophy those skills a little bit. Like, I don't necessarily need those skills as much anymore because I can do it in 3D. But like, I definitely am not as good at doing it by hand anymore. You know, and so what happens when you start offloading all these things to AI because, oh, I don't have 20 minutes to do that. I'll just do this real quick.
A little pause in the interview right here just to remind you to create your own personal ATMO profile and build your art portfolio over there. Transfer your other artwork from other art sites out there that are pro AI, where ATMO is not pro AI, and we will support you and protect you from that space. And as we grow and get larger, it'll be the ultimate place for recruiters to find you as they utilize the filtering system that they can use to find the experience level that they want. Please support ATMO, help it grow, and let's get back to it.
Those skills are going to fall by the wayside, and then you're going to become more and more reliant on these things. And, you know, ethics and data and all that stuff aside, I think it's a very slippery slope for what art turns into if people are just automating large chunks of their process off to this thing.
Well, you bring up the point of creativity, and the thing is that you build creative. Everyone wants to think they're special and creative. Like, you know, growing up, everyone thought that they were funny and creative and everything, right? You have like the basic creativity. Sure, you're a creative person, but there is a whole other ball game of creativity when you learn from the failures of trying to be creative and drawing it, right? So when you're drawing, you're understanding why that looks good. Why is that creative? Why is the light in that way specifically? What is the story behind it? What is the reasoning behind it? What am I doing it to draw the eye, right? So you can push that creativity into more unique stuff. So if you have just AI saying, okay, do my thought, that thing I have my brain, basically everyone in the world is going to have that kind of thought. Essentially. So like that will just lead into, like what you're saying, generic art everywhere. Everyone will be the same kind of stuff. It's like, in my mind, it's kind of like music. How music has been so dumbed down, like they're not even really learning the instruments, and everything's become so just super dumbed down. Basically, it's generic. Everything just sounds.
It's like
very
an assembly
similar.
line, a manufactured process for a lot of the music these days, for sure.
Yeah, and it's just their AI in. I remember when studios in general, like, you know, you talk to your colleagues like, man, I wish I freaking had AI to just do this stupid process for me. That's, you know, a tedious step that's just annoying. And that's where AI could be super powerful, where it could takes away a more technical, tedious task that has nothing to do with the creative process. It's just more of a technical part of it. Now, if you know the foundations, like even just being a badass 3D modeler, game designer, concept artist, if you don't know the foundations, you won't be the best you can possibly be as a 3D modeler, right? So if we do have to accept AI because it's just what it is, the ones that understand the foundations and the fundamentals, they will just surpass all the freaking average Joes out there anyway, because they know how this stuff works. And I get, obviously the ethics, like what you're saying, like this just, the lawsuits are everywhere now. Like I don't see the copyrights are gonna win. I see the whole thing as a giant bubble. You could look at the damn charts. That is a bubble. Like that's worse than the .com bubble.
It will burst for sure. It's just, you know, how many companies is it going to take with it? Right? Like it's going to do some damage when it happens. And
well, it's beyond, it's more than just tech companies. It's everything, because AI has been holding up the stock so much.
Well, yeah, non-tech companies are heavily invested in it. It's, the bubble will burst, and like, you know, AI is, as they say, here to stay, but it's what form, right? Is it going to be the generative stuff that's stealing from everyone, or is it going to be something a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more ethical once the sort of shakes out? Because, you know, Napster essentially did the same thing. You know what I mean? The peer-to-peer stuff, it's a little bit different, but the same kind
Lars was correct. Everyone demonized him so much at Metallica.
Right? At the time, you're like, hey, I'm 13. I want free music.
I just want it.
What the hell, man?
Yeah, man, I get free porn. Come on.
Yeah, and so, like, you know, I understand, like, as an adult, I'm like, you know, especially as a creative, but I think it's following the same arc where it's, you know, Napster got, you know, they got bitch slapped. You know what I mean? But we ended up with Spotify, which... Is that really any better? Their model sucks.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's one of my concerns is, do we end up with a Spotify model for all this other stuff? Because if that's the case, then we're screwed. You know, and I don't think that'll happen in that sense. I think there's more to it than that. People don't consume visuals the way they consume music. Right. But, you know, it goes to show you that you can't just take and distribute stuff any way you want when there's copyright involved. So hopefully with the lawsuits and hopefully regulation, depending on who wins the election, you know, maybe that'll come down. It's just, I think I treat it a little bit like global warming, right? And climate change, where there's no one solution to the AI debacle, right? It's a multifaceted thing. It's going to have to come from different areas, different solutions, regulation, legislation, lawsuits. It's kind of, you have to tackle it from all these different angles to sort of beat it into submission and make it something that's ethical and safe and respects people's rights and property and isn't going to upend the economy by eliminating tens, if not hundreds of millions of jobs over the next decade.
So that's the other argument, though. So they think, the average Joe thinks that it will, you know, it's the next big thing. It's the next evolutionary process that we've always done throughout our whole lives, right? What's the next big thing that's going to take us to the next frontier? And that's just going to change our economy. Everyone will be better for it and freer and everything, right? And that's a valid argument if you see it like that. It's just, how is it, like what you're saying, how is it going to play out? So we have laws in place already, even without regulation. So the copyright laws, that's a big deal. Like, I know, didn't China already win a lawsuit with that?
I haven't kept up as much with the China stuff, but I can't, I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Yeah. So if that does happen, then that's going to absolutely change the way they view AI. Because if I had an AI for my own personal self, that would be freaking great. I'd be like, okay, no one has access to my being, my sense, right? And you just study my art, Mr. Little AI. Go do some concepts for me because I'm too busy. I need a little help, right? But that's me. That's my essence, whatever. I could see that in the future, possibly. But stealing someone else's work without their permission, that's the big argument. And AI obviously can help with a lot of other things like, handicapped people, everything, like just a lot of things in general. You can think about it aggressively.
There's so much stuff AI can do for us, but I think at the end of the day, it doesn't need to be generative AI in the sense that it doesn't need to create things for us, right? Maybe if we had something that did UVs for us that was really efficient and good at it, I think a lot of people would celebrate that because that's a task that people get saddled with when they have other tasks to also do. And it sort of holds up the process a lot of the time, right? So it would be great if you could do stuff like that. Or if you have 10,000, 100,000, 200,000 reference images and inspiration on your computer, to have a system that can understand those and categorize them and do more advanced searches for you so you can find your stuff. Because I find myself like, where did I put that? I know I have these reference images and you got to dig for them. It'd be great to be able to type that in and have a system that could automatically categorize that stuff for you. So it's not generating anything, but it is helping you as an artist. Or like you said, if you could have something you could offload certain tasks to that was trained specifically on your work. The problem is that you need a foundational model in order for those fine tunings to work. And those foundational models are rife with copyright violations. So the amount of data you would need to train a model like that you could then fine tune, we're just not even anywhere close to that. It may not even be possible, unless someone puts together a completely Creative Commons, open source, data set of sorts that they can train that stuff on. But you're limited with that as well. And also Creative Commons has its own issues. People think, oh, it's Creative Commons, you can just use it. But there are how many different types of Creative Commons licenses that require attribution, share alike, amongst other things. So even if you were to use a bunch of Creative Commons stuff to create a ethical data set, you still need provenance. You still need to be able to say this came from where and to be able to credit people and stuff like that. So you're kind of limited to licensed data and public domain stuff. And I just don't know if there's enough of that going around, if anyone has the money to actually pay for what it's worth.
Well, I think isn't there something being in the process right now to force any AI image with a mark on it to say it's AI?
I think the different platforms have different ways. I know Meta for Instagram has been falsely labeling a lot of people's photos and images with AI. Yeah, and I don't know what they're using for that, something internal, but there's also stuff like Hive, which you can upload stuff to see if it's AI, but the reliability of that has kind of waned over the past few months, it looks like. It's kind of hit or miss. Most of those image detectors are. So I think one of the major issues is that people are like, oh, we'll fix that. We'll be able to trace these things back to where they came from. And I really don't think that's possible unless they start over. And even if they did start over, to do it reliably, I think it might be an insurmountable task to sort of create a process where exactly what was used in any particular image based on billions of other images. Yeah. And even if you could do that, would anybody it's like getting a check for a class action suit, right? Everyone gets $2. You know what I mean? If that's even the case for something like that, if you could even pull that off. So is that even worth it to anybody? I don't know. Like if you were to sell your work to a company for $100,000, that's great. You made a bunch of money real fast, but why would anyone hire you then if they can just generate your work for cheap? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that was a hypothetical question that was presented to me when I spoke at FACT last year, which is the conference on ACM conference on fairness, accountability, and transparency. It's basically a tech ethics conference. And that was presented to me. And I was like, I wouldn't do it for $1 million because you have to understand you're sabotaging the rest of your career. If you give your data over to someone who can then reproduce your work with AI, nobody has any reason to ever hire you. Right. I mean, yeah, like you're going to bring more to it than that. But if it's your style that people are after and sort of your visual flair, $1 million isn't going to set you up for the rest of your life in this economy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. $10 million. There's always a price. That's the thing.
Maybe,
for most people.
like even then it's like, you know, like a lot of people, their backs are against the wall, so they might be, you know, if they were offered that, they might be willing to take it. But what company is going to offer that kind of money for any of that stuff?
I know, right?
No one's ever going to offer any amount of money that I think would make it worth it for any artist to dump their stuff in there.
No, don't totally.
You know, unless you're already really well established and it doesn't matter and it's just an extra revenue stream for you. I just don't think it helps anyone. Just kind of like people who contribute to stock on different stock websites, whether it's Adobe or Getty or Shutterstock. Like that's a side gig for most people. It's extremely difficult to make any amount of money with stock because they take the lion's share of the licensing for stock images. You know what I mean? All these stock platforms. And so a lot of people try to sort of treat that as a side gig. They're photographers and they also sell stock images. And some people do it for, you know, full time as their income. But like, you know, if you were to sell off your stuff to a data set, you know, like that's side gig money. That's not real income. What are you going to do outside that? And what happens when people realize they don't need to hire you? They can go and prompt your stuff for, you know, $10 a month. So I don't know. That's a concern to me. I don't think they're willing to pay anyways. Like OpenAI, they won't pay people for their data unless they can't access it easily.
Well, OpenAI, I heard Sam Altman literally joke about how they make zero revenue. And the joke was that like he tells his investors that eventually AI will tell him how to make money off of AI.
Yeah, like, I remember I tweeted that video. And like the funny thing is though, is like it comes off as like a joke, like a cynical joke. And then you realize he's dead.
This is a giant bubble. Like what is this crazy? Like it's all hype. Everything's just hype. I said hype.
Give us $7 trillion. And then once we reach AGI, we'll just ask the AGI how to make that money back. And he was serious.
Yeah.
And it's like, how are people buying this anymore? Like, and even if that was a little bit of a joke or he's being a little facetious with it, like
I think he's dead serious.
Oh, for sure. The stuff that comes out of his mouth all the time with stuff like that. And it's like you're just kicking the can down the road. You're just saying, we'll figure it out. Just give us money. We'll scale this thing. But like, if my understanding is correct, ChatGPT 4 was basically trained by the end of 2022, which means we've not had a substantial increase in what something like ChatGPT can do.
Wait, why is it only at 2022?
I think that's when I think they fed it other data, but I think the main training for ChatGPT 4 was done in 2022. So we're approaching the end of 2024 with no significant increase in its abilities. There's like 4.0 and then there's like 4 Turbo or 4 Mini. I don't know. There's different versions now. But, you know, I'm kind of dialed into that stuff with the AI people and things on Twitter and talking to people. And yeah, it's like, it's almost like they've hit a bit of a brick wall. All these different LLMs from these different companies are all kind of like approaching the same sort of abilities and peaking a little bit. And there's just not enough data to feed them, I think, to potentially get them to be that much better. And so I think the reason we don't have ChatGPT 5 yet, and may not until sometime next year or the end of next year, is because they've not been able to increase its abilities as far as they expected to. And so we might be reaching a point of diminishing returns with what AI can do, right? Like Midjourney version 6 it's really good, you know, for what the stuff that it does, right? How much better can it get is the question, because it's still a slot machine, right? From this point forward, really the only way a lot of these things can get substantially better is by offering control and less hallucinations, right? And who knows?
Well, you say so when you say hallucinations, it's that whole crazy thing on Google AI where you ask them, "Hey, is it smart to eat a bee?" Yes, it's very smart to eat a bee. You should do it right now.
one small rock a day is all you need to be healthy. So they've done a lot of studies on that sort of stuff, and it just bullshits all the time.
Yeah.
Right. And it's one of the biggest reasons it's an issue is that it does it so confidently.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like, oh, maybe blah, 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 blah. And you're like, oh, that doesn't sound so certain. It does it with full confidence.
Yeah.
Just gets things like so wrong all the time. And there's a lot of back and forth in the machine learning community between people like, oh, that's a solvable problem, we'll get rid of that. And there's other people who are like, no, it's like they don't think it's a solvable problem. It might be inherent to the technology because you're feeding it all sorts of quality of data, right? You're getting Reddit stuff in there, which is where the put glue in your pizza and eat one small rock a day is like the onion, right? And so the LLMs currently don't really have a mechanism, I think, for understanding what's reliable data and what's not. And I assume the only way to do that would be to go back and label some of these things manually. But I really feel like the way these things work, because people are constantly probing them and poking holes in them and finding out they're doing things they shouldn't be doing, it's kind of like a ship that keeps springing holes. And every time you patch one and you think you've solved an issue, there's another one somewhere else. And I think that's inherent to the technology. It may not be a solvable problem from like a holistic perspective. It may just be, how much can we patch this thing in different ways before it's kind of suitable for some of this stuff? And at the end of the day, people find when they use like the LLMs, like it's more work to research this crap and correct it if I need to than it is to just write it outright in the first place. Mm-hmm. You know, the cost benefits to it, you know, I don't think people are seeing it. And, you know, we're talking LLMs now, but image generation stuff too. A lot of companies are pushing back and being like putting, clauses in their contracts and stuff like that. Like, you're not allowed to use this for our advertising campaign because of liability and so on and quality and so forth. So yeah, I don't know. I think the landscape is like this. Some companies and studios are like, keep it away. We don't want that liability. And other ones are like, bring it in. Let's go all in on that. And so,
yeah, well, I mean, those type of people are in the mindset of like, you know what, you're missing out. Only the ones that embrace the future will be the ones that come out on top. And I get it. That, you know, basically goes with everything else we've ever thought in the past. It's just a different.
It's the same lines you get fed with crypto and NFTs.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. And like, yeah, there is some validity to the blockchain and things it can do. There is some validity to NFTs, but as we see with these new technologies, they are ripe for exploitation and grifting and just scams. And that sort of tanks everything else that those things might have been capable of, right? I don't think crypto is the future. I don't think NFTs are the future. And I'm not certain that generative AI is the future. I think AI will have a place, but not necessarily generative AI in its current form. I think people are already getting sick of it. Even
they are, definitely.
Even the AI people on Twitter, I've seen a lot of them talking about how it's kind of, you know,
it's a gimmicky, same old thing. Yeah.
Pinterest is bad now, where it's like, it's really kind of hard to sift through all the garbage. It's like, yeah, but you're the one championing that. Like, did you not understand that this was going to flood the market with stuff that was hard to find the good stuff that you really want to see in? And I think some people are starting to realize, oh, maybe it wasn't such a good idea, but they're all so deep into it that a lot of them aren't willing to admit that they might have been a little bit wrong about some things.
So the thing with bubbles is that when it pops, all the scams and crap get filtered, and the real companies and the better, stronger foundational companies come through to the top and survive the depression, basically, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something you could see with, let's say, like crypto or AI, where maybe, you know, the wiser companies will come through instead of the quick cash, scammy ones, you know? So, I mean, it is a matter of time until we'll see it. I'm pretty darn confident that it's going to burst. And maybe that will be a different conversation when that happens, and maybe more ethical things will come through, a different open conversation, because, you know, people are super overconfident right now. They're like, no, this is the way. Until it bursts, then they'll be like, reality check. You know,
well, they need you to believe that. Yeah. They need you to believe that because they're all in on it. Exactly. It's not quite like crypto where I've got $50,000 invested and I need other people to be invested too. That way my money goes up and I don't.
Well, they think they can make a film now. They think like, this is their future. This is my way out. Yes.
Well, it's interesting because I don't understand why people think that, like, the myth of the idea guy, you know, right? The idea man, you know, that if you have a good enough idea, that you can sell that idea and it'll get made and you'll make a bunch of money. And it doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. Right. And so what AI has done is it's given a little bit of agency to the idea guys, where they go, I've got this really great idea for a movie. I love movies. I love watching movies. I don't know anything about making them.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about composition, art, lighting, or acting or anything.
Or writing.
But with AI, I can now go and make a movie. And it's like, I don't think you understand the complexity of making a movie.
Everything's always more complicated, and they just think, "Woo, I could do this totally."
Yeah, well, it's hard enough to make a movie the traditional way, and AI, it's like wrangling that. I remember when I was in San Francisco working on Matrix Resurrections, we had a meeting with Lana Wachowski, and we were talking about filmmaking and stuff like that. And I said something along the lines of, it's a small miracle any movie that gets made ends up being good at all because it's so complicated. Because we were talking about logistics and things like that. And she corrected me. She goes, no, it's a huge miracle that anything turns out good at all. And like, she's right. Like it's wild. You could have all the proper pieces to make a good movie and it could bomb or it could turn out terrible. There's so much going on there that you never know when you're making a movie, right? Like you hope it's good, but maybe it's not, and it's crazy to me. It's the Dunning-Kruger thing, right? They don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And even me, like people are like, well, wouldn't you like to go and make your own film? And it's like, I'm not a filmmaker. Like, yeah, in my head, that would be cool as hell to have my own movie out there, my own idea. But I'm not a director. I don't know how to deal with actors. I'm not a DP. I do lighting stuff, but like, I don't know how to put a C-stand together. I mean, not that it's difficult, but
they're saying, like, basically they're saying we don't have to do any of that anymore. Just tell the AI do it for us.
It's like, it's crazy because like, imagine you're on set filming something and you want a hair light on someone or you need to move something and just small adjustments somewhere. Just like, like right here, the hair light separates you from the background, right? So if you want to move that or add it or get rid of it, how do you do that with AI?
Yeah.
Say you like the shot that you got, like, how do you add that in there? Do you do a full new generation? Do you have to use another AI tool to relight it? Like, what if you want to move a prop from the background to over here? It's like stuff that you would do on set in an instant. Yeah. It's something that becomes a thing where you have to generate a whole bunch of things. Like with the balloon head or airhead Sora video, it came out that I think they were generating 300 videos per one video that they actually ended up using in the edit. So for every shot in the edit, they had to generate something like 300 to get that one. It's like, that's a huge waste of compute and energy right there. And also they had to go in there and do manual edits to all those things too, because they still weren't right. So they had to use traditional effects on top of what the AI gave them, as well as go through hundreds and hundreds of generations before they got what they need. And what they ended up with still wasn't very compelling. It was really, you could have, like,
it's a cool little show. Like, oh wow, that's impressive. That's it. It's not something you can go and make a full thing with. It's just,
I don't know how much that ended up costing in the end, but like you could shoot that guerrilla style in New York City in a day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A lot of that stuff. I forget how much of it was Viz effects heavy, but it was a lot of balloon guy walking through New York in the subway and stuff.
It's kind of like when
you could do that.
It's like when games say, this is our trailer for this game, and this is in-game engine, and it's not at all. It's complete cinematics, like post. It's just complete lies.
They have a word for that. It's bullshot.
Bullshot. That makes sense.
Yeah. So like that's. I think it started back like old. I mean, even like in the game magazine days, you know what I mean? We're talking 15, 20 years ago, where some new game would get advertised and they would fake the screenshots from the game.
Yeah.
They would crank up the settings or they would touch up the aliasing on the edges and do all sorts of stuff. And you would have an image that looks like it's from the game, but is doctored in a way. And they do it with trailers too. And instead of bullshit, they call it bullshots, which I always thought was funny. And so like you can't trust that stuff when you see it.
I mean, shit, we even work on literal trailer VFX shots. Like I've worked on stuff where like, okay, this is gonna be the film. It's like, no, it's not gonna be in the film. It's just for the trailer. I'm like, that's so deceiving. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, well, I remember with was it Avengers Infinity War? They it's interesting because they wanted to hide some of what happens in the movie to avoid like spoilers and to keep the audience surprised. And so they did a big VisFX shot for the trailer that wasn't intended to be in the movie. And a lot of people are upset about that. But it's interesting because I can see it both ways, because on one hand, you could talk about false advertising, but on the other hand, you're sort of protecting the experience. And here's a cat. You're protecting the experience of people. But how far can you go with that before it's deception? Because what'll happen sometimes too is that a movie trailer will come out and then they'll do a bunch of reshoots, and a lot of the stuff, or a re-edit, and a lot of the stuff that was in that original trailer isn't in the final movie, and it ends up being kind of a different movie. And it's like, there's a big question there. I think a lot of people, it's like, is that false advertising? Is it deceptive, or is it just part of the artistic process? What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to tell people these things? I don't know. It's an interesting problem, I think, with the VisFX stuff, because they do create shots for trailers. The question is how much of an impact does that have on viewership in the movie and things like that? But they do it for games, they do it for movies. It's part of advertising, really.
Yeah, it is what it is. What do you think about a lot of the? You get a lot of hate on Twitter. That's for sure. They get aggressive. Like so. I don't know why they get so angry. Like they are just sensitive people. So. But what's your answer for when they say, well, how is it any different from taking a picture or studying someone's painting and then using their art style to influence your art style, or whatever, or you're using it as a reference? And that, you hear that all the time with, pro AI people.
There's been some drama lately about using AI as a reference. Well, they've done studies. Like, it's not difficult. The people liken, machine learn, it learns just like a human. It doesn't. Like, it just doesn't. There's neuroscience studies. There's studies about machine learning. It doesn't learn the same way. People sort of like hear neurons and neural networks and this and that, and they're just like, so that's the same. No, it's an approximation, right? Like, it does work in a similar fashion, but really what AI is doing, generative AI, is compressing a data set. Even Emad from the X-Stability CEO, who looks like got ousted but claims he left. So even he just constantly used to talk about how it's compressing things. In fact, he loves Silicon Valley, the show, and makes references all the time to the compression model that they develop in that show, how it can compress, its extreme compression, and it's takes everything back out. And so he likens it to compression all the time. And that is effectively how it works in a sense. It's just that when you compress a JPEG, you get those blocky artifacts. But with AI, the artifacts that you're getting is not blockiness in the normal sense. What you're getting is it's pulling data from other places to reconstitute an image to make up for the lack of data that it may have on something specific, right? So no, it doesn't learn like a person, and it's not... a person doesn't internalize billions of images in their head that they carry with them and compress down and can recall parts of at any given time and reproduce them instantly, right? Like if you're going to recall something in your head, it's fallible, it's processed, it's different than what you remember. What you remember seeing and what was actually there are always going to be different, right? And so you're pulling that out of your own head, and it's going through your arm, onto the tablet, onto the screen, paintbrush, pencil. And there's a whole angle of what happens between those areas, like from your head to the paper or the screen, where how you move your hand, your motor function, your skills, how you hold something, just all that stuff combines to give you your final result for an image. It's more complex than a human going, I remember this thing, there it is. It just, you don't do it that way. Like, some of the stuff that I did with Midjourney to sort of expose the copyright infringement, I was able to pull like almost a 1-to-1 frame from Dune out of it, right? It looks almost, you wouldn't know unless someone told you, and even if they told you, you go, really? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It looks exactly the same. And so a person couldn't do that. I don't care how long someone sits in a room and stares at that image. A person can't walk away from that and do a 1-to-1 copy of it. Maybe there's a few people out there that have some brain injuries or some special sauce going on, that have photographic memories. I know it happens, but that's not the human experience. Yeah, and especially a human couldn't do it with one image, to say nothing of
over and over again.
Thousands.
It's as if they're just taking the image and putting it back on. It's funny because so if I share my screen, I pulled up your tweet about that, and I wanted to talk about that. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so this is kind of what you were saying, right? Where they just pulled that. Basically, it looks like frames from the movie.
Yeah, the wild thing is that if you go through some of those comments, a lot of people are like, well, it looks better than the movie. And I was like,
like, what?
I mean, in some circumstances, like, yeah, the details are kind of sharper and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, but you're missing the point. Like, the point is it shouldn't be able to do this. Like, this is not like inspiration. This is not like I have an idea of what Thanos kind of looks like. This is like, one of the things that's extremely striking in these images is that the costume details are 1-to-1.
Yeah.
Like, if you zoom in, like all the details on the filigree and all these things going on, his muscles, the lines, like it's 1-to-1. And speaking to this, there's like we were talking about how like sometimes VisFX shots end up just in trailers. Well, I know for a fact that Midjourney trained specifically on the Infinity War trailer because I was able to reproduce a frame that was in that trailer that's not in the actual movie. Right. And so like we know they trained on the movies and stuff like that, but we also know it looks like they probably trained on high quality YouTube trailers and stuff like that too, like because it's not in the actual movie. So there's only one place they could have gotten that, which is a single trailer or two that showed up online. So like we know what they're doing. Like this isn't happenstance. We know what they fed into it. It's just it's wild that they can get away with it recreating things this closely and people not being like, hey, that's clearly copyright infringement.
Yeah.
And one of the issues that people go, oh, but you asked for Infinity War, so that's your fault. But through the work that I was doing with the prompting and stuff like that and working a little bit with Gary Marcus, who's an AI expert, we were able to show, we were able to get it down to one word, which is just screenshot. So just the word screenshot, it won't do it every generation, right? Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 tries and you'll get an image. Sometimes you get 2 or 3, but just the word screenshot will fairly consistently spit out different images from games or movies. Oh, sometimes wow. it looks just like the character, right? But it's not actually a frame from anything. And other times it's like, that's from that movie. And
that would make sense because you're saying screenshot.
And they're like, well, you're asking for a screenshot. It's like, yeah, but you're allowed to describe a style of something. If you want what looks like a movie screen cap, that should be a valid style, right? But when you type in, say, something like popular movie screen cap, that spits out nonstop film frames or things that look like they're from the films, like a perfect Loki, a perfect Spider-Man. You know, sometimes I've had instances that I've shared where you could type in, say, movie screen cap or popular movie screen cap, and you'll get 4 different properties. Mm-hmm. You'll get DC, you'll get Marvel, you'll get Star Wars, and then you'll get a Jurassic World. Like,
well, here's the thing: it's like
grid, which is crazy.
If you sell this stuff, that's like even worse. So if you were to copy as an artist, like you're drawing, right? Not even just using AI, and you just drew someone else's same exact composition, same exact, like even just, let's avoid characters. We're just doing an environment and we don't even have the same textures or type of environment, but your composition is dead on, 1-to-1, the same as some other artist. That artist gets freaking furious.
Oh, like, yeah.
There's like, so imagine now you're literally saying 1 for 1, and you're going into a gallery and say, hey, I painted this. This is my work. And then someone, it's like, excuse me, that's my work. What are you talking about? You're stealing my work. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, even just outside of AI, you get in trouble for that stuff. So to them, for them to think that this is the same like this is fine. Like, yeah, you got to at least admit, hey, this is my AI thing based off of this artwork, and I'm not going to sell it as whatever. It's just like, look what this can do. Okay, I can maybe get behind that a little. But if you're just going to say, I guarantee you someone probably took this image and went into a gallery and said, look what I did. Like, it
totally happens. It's already happening. Well, here's the thing about that too, is that a lot of people go, like the AI proponents were like, yeah, but what about fan art? All you artists do fan art, which fan art and artists, it's a very small subset of the art community, people that do fan art. But not everyone is selling fan art. It's fine to do fan art if you're not selling it. But from a technical legal perspective, you're not allowed to sell fan art. You've never been allowed to do it. It's a copyright infringement. You're not allowed to infringe on copyright and trademark. Even going to conventions and selling fan art, you're not technically allowed to do that. And you can be shut down by the studios or companies if they want to.
So even with the fan, or like say Batman fan art short film?
Yeah, I mean, if you're making money with it, it's a problem, right? And so, but studios, it depends on how big it is, right? If you're just an artist selling stuff at a con, studios will look the other way because it doesn't really damage their brand and reputation. They've sort of let people do that sort of in good faith a lot of the time. But if you try to push it too far and you try to make your own comic book with Batman, no, they're going to shut you down.
Yeah.
Right. And so what artists that do fan art and sell it, they're sort of operating within the good graces of the studios. Right. And that's what a lot of the AI proponents don't understand, is that what they're doing is not strictly speaking legal. It's just that it's accepted to a degree. But these studios could come down on fan artists anytime they want. Yeah. So the same goes for AI in a sense, right? It's not that they're saying, well, fan art is okay. You guys do that. So why isn't this? It's like, but it's not okay. It's just that people are willing to turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, because it's also positive publicity for them in advertising.
In a lot of ways, yeah. You know, and also you don't want to look like the bad guy by shutting down a bunch of little independent artists that are making some money off stuff like that. There's some big artists that do it that make a lot of money, and it's if a studio decides to go and shut them down, like this, fair enough. It's just they use that argument with AI, and it's like, yeah, but the fan art stuff is not strictly speaking okay either. It's just that studios are okay with it. What happens if studios aren't okay with how this AI is being developed? If you're going to equate the two things, then they're within their rights to step in and potentially do something about it, to say nothing of all the smaller individual artists rather than the large studios to step up and say something. So there's the pro AI side conflates a lot of things because I don't think they really understand how the art community really works, because most of them aren't really from here. They just kind of stumbled into it 2 years ago. And they also don't understand how copyright and business stuff works a lot of the time. And so they'll speak all these sort of grand ideas and wouldn't it be nice if, and this is how it is, when in reality, there's been people that have been dealing with copyright stuff and art in the industry for many, many years ago. That's not how that works. And they'll still fight you on it. And they'll say, well, you're just, you're a big crybaby. I hope you lose your job. And it's like, that's all I really need to know about that argument. It's when you try to talk to a lot of them to say like, hey, I actually know a little bit about this. That's not how it works. They'll move the goalpost, so they'll twist it around. And it's not really worth engaging on that level with those things anymore on an individual basis. There's too much trolling and too much disinformation. So I try to fight the bigger battles these days. But yeah, the copyright and the fan art thing really, it kind of irks me because they don't understand. And once you tell them about that, they frequently will just stop responding. When you tell them that the fan art thing is like, you're actually making an argument against AI right now.
Yeah. Could you, before we go and check out your work, I want to actually get you to explain what AGI is, because that is the future, and I don't think most people understand what it is, the difference between that and regular AI.
So AGI is, I think the definition is kind of a little bit fluid depending on who you talk to, but it stands for artificial general intelligence. And the idea basically being is that once we reach AGI, we'll have an AI that is capable of doing everything that a human can do and potentially better, right? So we have chatbots now, and they can't do everything. They can't reason everything out. They can't even tell you if two lines are intersecting, right? But they're pushing to get to AGI because that's when we'll have real artificial intelligence that can do real human work. And I don't understand why that's a good thing, because
humans are lazy. We don't want to do anything.
Yeah, but also we've seen Terminator, right? And I don't subscribe to the whole doomer thing necessarily, where I think AI is going to end the world. But I think it could destroy the economy and end the world in that sense. I don't think it's going to blow everybody up, but the idea being, like, Sam Altman talks about replacing the median human, which is crazy.
What? The average human he wants to replace.
Yeah, that's his deal.
How can anyone support that?
Right? It's like, it kind of shows you what he thinks about the average
He's
person.
a god. He doesn't think he thinks we're little peasants. We're ants.
I don't know what his net worth is. I don't know if it's the hundreds of millions or over a billion. It might be very well in the billions. But that's what he thinks of the average person, right? Like, I'm not 100% sure about his upbringing, but I'm certain he probably comes from some amount of wealth. And even if he doesn't, like, his perspective of society is so skewed. The idea that, like, yeah, we're going to create AGI and replace the median human, and then it's like, okay, well, what are these people that are replaced going to do? And then everyone just vaguely goes, oh, universal basic income will be here then. It's like, yeah, but nobody's working on that, right? And there's like Jan LeCun, who works at Meta, said something along the lines of, I'm just like a technical person. I work on this stuff, blah, 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 blah. That's someone else's problem. And it's like, wait a second. Like, I replied to him on that, and it was sort of like the idea. It's like, hey, I'm just setting fires. It's the fire department's job to put them out. They'll be here eventually. Somebody will call them, but I'm just here to set the fires. Right.
See, and this is where, like, a lot of, let's say, techie and scientists people start losing their moralities. And because they just look at something and it's like, oh, it's just cool. And they don't think anything through. Obviously, it's not all of them, but this is where you get a batch of them that are just like, dude, are you turning into a psychopath? Like, do you not understand that you're just, what's going on?
I think they've been in the tech ecosystem for so long, and like, everyone likes to say, oh, they're drinking the Kool-Aid, and like, that's funny and all that, but there is some validity there to the idea that they've fostered these environments around them where it becomes this feedback loop, where everyone's kind of sniffing everyone else's farts and sniffing your own farts, and then it's one big fart. Like, it's like, that's kind of what it is. It's like, you start to believe that stuff when that's all you hear.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to even blame some of those people, because there's people that are much smarter than you are going like, oh yeah, totally. And you're like, you know what? Like, this person's done this, this, and this in the past. I kind of feel like they know what they're talking about. Right. And so you just you allow that to go on, but they're spewing the same nonsense as everybody else. Everyone's kind of like, we agree on this, right? And that's what's going to be, hoping that the bubble doesn't burst. And so I don't know. There's a lot of really great people in machine learning. Like, let's be real here. Like, I've met a lot of really cool people that are very concerned about these issues. Not all of people in machine learning and developing AI are doing it unethically or trying to push unethical generative AI and stuff like that. There's people like Ed Newton Rex, who I've talked to a number of times. He was the ex-VP of audio at Stability AI, and he left because of these types of issues. Dr. Timnit Jabru, she got fired from Google for sounding an alarm on AI biases and ethics and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So there are a lot of people out there that are actually working really hard to push against this stuff and do it the right way. It's just that they get drowned out, and like Gary Marcus, he's very outspoken about it too. A lot of people in machine learning are very outspoken about it. It's just like, you're pushing against this big, heavy tide of people trying to make money. And so hopefully enough pushback happens that, those voices can rise above, because there are a lot of them. So, like, I don't like to paint all these AI and tech people as being the devil, because they're not.
Of course not.
Even the people that we don't like, they're not evil people. I just think they're a little delusional and misguided a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think they get lost, and they just need to be pushed back into, back onto the road. Like, you just kind of steer it off a little bit. And I get it. You get carried away. Like, whenever you're inventing something, you're like, oh, this is sick. I think there was a point where I actually was trying to outsource some people to help me create an AI that can cut out clouds for me, because I didn't want to do it anymore. But then it turned out I needed thousands and thousands of pre-cut out clouds, and I tried, and I was like, nope, not doing this anymore. So
see, that's like, to me, that's valid. That's a valid use right there. You know what I mean? That's not going to kill someone's job, and it's not going to generate new clouds for someone. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's a useful tool, kind of like generative fill in Photoshop, which I don't use because Firefly and the ethics, so on and so forth. But there is a version of that that's very valid. The idea
like
being
painting out, making a clean plate so easily. Like,
because content-aware fill does a decent job for some things, but generative fill, like, I'm not going to generate a dog or a robot to throw in my thing, but if I need to extend my canvas 30% to the side, and it's just a bunch of vegetation and slop, and you don't want to take 30 minutes to blah, 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 and put it all back together, whatever it's going to take. and you can use that, like that's valid because it's referencing your image, but
Yeah.
it's still very much reliant on the data set, and the data sets are generally not ethical. Adobe's been caught using Midjourney to train their stuff. Like
Oh,
5%
really?
of their training data is in
So that's
Midjourney.
interesting because studios are saying, well, because Adobe has been passed legally, like they're good ethically to with AI, then we could do it in our games and other things. If that comes out, they could be in deep trouble.
Well, so that's the main thing. That's what's driving, I think, the AI ecosystem right now is OpenAI gets away with it. Midjourney gets away with it. All these big companies, Microsoft, all these big companies are getting away with it now, which emboldens all these other startups and venture capitalists to go all in on it. So if the big guys are getting away with it, of course the little guy will,
Mhm.
right? Like look at the scale at which they're doing. We're doing a much smaller project over here. So it creates this sort of gold rush arms race scenario. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like the ethics of it, but like with in terms of like the generative fill stuff, like if you could do it in a way where it's just like content aware fill on steroids and it's ethical and it's not generating things based on other people's work, that would be extremely useful for an artist and is not going to replace people
Yeah. I
or
did
steal from them in a way, right?
I used it once for removing an arm that was in front of a person standing in a photo, and it did it. I was like, "What the fuck?" Like it had the guy was wearing a suit, and it just did it. Like that would have been a pain and tedious, stupid, uncreative task for me to do myself, and it just did it like
Yeah,
perfectly.
there's like, it's the worst when you're just trying to full on get it to generate something new. But it's actually it does a decent job when you're trying to do stuff based on the image. Fill in a background spot. It'll do it much better than content aware. Like I said, I've messed with a lot of these things because it's important to me to understand what's going on,
Mhm.
especially with like the Midjourney stuff. I had people attacking me. It's like, yeah, but you use Midjourney. It's like, yeah, but the context of why I was using Midjourney is very important. Like I was trying to expose what they were doing. It's like, yeah, but you still paid them and you still used it. And it's like, I
Ugh.
mean, I guess if that's the argument you want to go for, but
That's just weird. Like
I mean, I lost
lazy argument.
I lost a lot of money because they banned me 3 times. They never refunded me and they never communicated with me about the ban. In fact, I mentioned it. I mentioned it on Twitter to David Holtz, who's the CEO of Midjourney, and he offered me $100, not as a refund, but to read books on like tech utopias.
What?
Yeah, he said, "I'll give you $100 if you read some stuff on you read some of these books." And I was like, "What kind
See,
of
they're
answer
not
is
helping
that?"
their cause. Like these,
You know,
get off your fucking horse. Like shit, dude.
it was
These
hilarious to
guys,
me.
the thing with these fucking tech guys that really irritates me is that they think they're so fucking brilliant. They think they're amazing and awesome. They're all based off of hype, and it's just they just need a punch in the face sometimes. They're like, dude, who do you fucking think you like? Shut up. They're just little nerds
Yeah,
that just sit
I
behind a
don't want to.
computer. Like it's
Yeah, I
just
get it. I don't want to rag on anyone too
sometimes
hard.
you need some freaking like reality checks. Like because you know you're
The problem
behind your
is
damn keyboard. Like who do you think you are? Like it
it's a
just
bunch
it
of
irritates
people
me.
it's a bunch of people that come from tech who've got too much money, who have been, like I said, sniffing their own farts for too long. If you go onto any of their Twitter accounts, like Emod or David Holes or like Sam Altman and some of the other big people, they like to wax poetic in like really vague, nonsensical ways about big tech and the future and what's coming. And it's like, it sounds deep and smart, but in the way like a 13-year-old thinks they're deep and smart.
Like
It's the stuff they post is fairly embarrassing. And it's like,
yeah.
you were adults saying this stuff. And like, that's the type of hype stuff you think is like a 13-year-old when you get a new game console and it blows your mind because you've never seen anything like that before.
The thing is that they truly like I know people that have been to let's say these high and mighty like private events to talk about the future and maybe they were related to Red Bull. I don't think it was Red Bull events, but stuff like that that's in LA, and they truly go up on stage and say we are smarter than all of them. They just don't understand what the future looks like. They can't comprehend because they just aren't as good as us. This is their mindset. Like this is legit how they think. And it's
don't they know we're trying to help these peasants? Like, can't they just lay down and let us help them?
They sound like a legit stereotype supervillain. Like,
it's very culty. Here's the thing. It's been culty in tech for a long time. I mean, if you've watched Silicon Valley, that show's fairly old now. I'm not sure when it started.
I haven't watched it.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's good. It really takes the piss out of Silicon Valley, but it's been culty for a very, very long time. It's just that I think it's coming to a head with AI stuff. For whatever reason, it's like at the pinnacle of like the cult stuff. Everyone, it's just
they probably never had to work a day in their damn life.
There's the effect of accelerationists, right? The EAC they call it.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you'll see that on people's Twitter names on their profiles that they're EAC. And you can usually ignore what they say when you see that, because they usually have the unhinged techno-utopia take on things about universal basic income and about how AI is going to cure cancer and save all of us and global warming. But it's this optimistic future mindset, which, hey, cool, right? But I live in the real world, right? It's fun to think about and fantasize about these things, but these people are like actually believing it and pushing it, rather than it being like the world's largest, most embarrassing ARG. Like, it's like an alternate reality game they've all sort of committed themselves to, and there's not a lot of like truth to a lot of it, but they're just kind of like hoping they can manifest it. But if you go on to like, there's like the EAC community on Twitter, you can dive into there and just see a lot of really, really weird stuff and embarrassing takes. Like, people trying, like, a lot of these tech guys who love Dune and think Dune is great, but are trying to say that it's not anti-tech and it's not anti-AI, when like that's a huge component of what Dune is, right? And they're like, they twist all these things around. It's like the meme and the tweet, the torment nexus, Like,
man, you got all these terms I'm learning right now.
Have you seen that? The tweet where it's like, it's like an author writes a book called, Don't Create the Torment Nexus. Right. Okay. And then big tech comes out and says, hey, we've created the torment nexus from the book Don't Create the Torment Nexus. And it's like, that's kind of what, I mean, it's kind of become shorthand for this whole thing, which that's what big tech does.
Yeah.
Is they see something that was cool in a movie, but is a cautionary tale that flew right over their head. And they go, wouldn't it be cool if we did that? It's kind of like how they've got these robot cops in New York. It's like, did you not see RoboCop?
Hey, RoboCop was a cool movie.
Right? Or like, let's put all this AI stuff into our missiles. Like, did you not see Terminator? It's like, it's a slippery slope. Like, I don't think we're going to have a bunch of robots walking around killing people, but like war crimes, oh yeah, like definitely.
Yeah, I don't. It's gonna have to work its way out. It's just a Great Depression, maybe. I don't know. Something needs to reset. Who knows, man? Like,
we need a hard reset.
A hard reset, and I personally think that it's obviously very, very traumatic for most people, but a Great Depression, I think, is like the only way out to bring reality. It's like a giant reality check to everyone.
I mean, it might be headed that way when the bubble pops, and a bunch of companies that we were reliant on for non-AI stuff before sort of, go into chapter 11 or something. Who knows? Yeah.
Well, I mean,
we might be in for some rough times.
No, when you're panicking that you don't have the latest iPhone, there is something wrong with our society of like, I don't think you realize how good you have it. I think we need a little reality check to everyone. So,
well, people thought about that with, people for the longest time were saying, yeah, we just need a plague to kind of like, cull the herd a little bit. It's too many people on this planet. And it's like,
I'm not saying kill it or overpopulation or killing
No, I know. But like COVID happened and people were like, oh yeah, this actually kind of sucks. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I don't know. It's just like, it's not
the things that
the future is not what I wanted it to be when I was a child. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens in 2025. I think something interesting will happen in 2025. So let's move over to your work. This has been fun talking about AI and stuff. Maybe I'll get you on and have like a debate against an anti-AI guy. That would be interesting.
I'm the anti-AI guy.
I mean, with a pro AI. Yeah, let's check out your work. That would be actually pretty cool if we have like a debate or something with some
I'm
guy
not super opposed to that. I was, you know, Shadiversity, right?
Nope.
Okay, well, never mind then.
What is Shadowversity?
The YouTuber. He does all the sword fighting stuff.
Sword fighting stuff.
Yeah, like the LARPing and the sword stuff. Well, he got really deep into AI and all that stuff last year, and I was supposed to go on a debate with him because I made a video that kind of took down some of his opinions and ideas on art and stuff like that in AI, and he got big mad about it. So I made like a 22 minute video sort of addressing his 40 something minute video. And he responded with a 3.5 hour video.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Which,
you know what?
Which I didn't watch.
Let's get the debate between these two.
Well, here's the thing. I was supposed to be on a debate with him, and he refused. And the person that went on the debate that I was supposed to be with mentioned it, brought it up. Be like, how come you didn't want to debate Reid? He's in the industry. He understands these things. He's been doing this a long time. And Shad, he flew off the handle and got very upset. And I clipped it and put it on Twitter because it was funny to me. But he's kind of tanked his whole brand and image with the AI stuff and just like some really bad takes on a lot of stuff. But so that was like my first time I was like up for a debate on something, and then that kind of fell through. And so I'm not totally opposed to doing a debate. It just kind of depends on who it's with, because I think there's a lot of circumstances where people are you're just spin your wheels. We've been having this conversation for 1.5 years, 2 years now, the same conversation with people. And I don't know how effective a debate at this point is really going to be. Well, unless people are coming at it from a more nuanced perspective, right?
Well, the thing is that if you don't get face-to-face, and technically I guess it's still not face-to-face if it's computer to computer, like a Zoom, but that kind of, lets people let their guard down a bit. And who knows, maybe you'll learn something, and maybe he'll learn something, and maybe, you just didn't think of a certain perspective before.
I'm not opposed to debating Shad, but I know for a fact that he would not do it. But if there's someone else out there, like, I'm not opposed to the idea. I think there could be value there. It's just, I don't want it to be an hour of two people saying the same stuff they've always said and no one getting anywhere.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of debates and videos on that sort of thing already. So it would have to be worth the time, I think.
Yeah.
It's because it can devolve very quickly. I went onto a Twitter Spaces earlier in the year, and I think they ended up getting 400 or 500 people in the room at peak or something like that. And it was basically me with a bunch of AI people. Gary Marcus was in there initially, and then he left. And then I was in there for a couple hours afterwards, just kind of trying to discuss this stuff. And some people were really cool about it and had more nuanced takes, and there was some discussions going on. But there were also a lot of people that were getting really upset with me and yelling at me and calling me stupid. You know what I mean? And things like that.
Well, that's why you need a moderator.
Yeah. So like, that's like, I've kind of done it to an extent, kind of gone into the lion's den, and that was kind of a lousy experience, but I got to say my piece. Yeah. So I'm not opposed to doing it again. It's just, I think moderation is key. And I think a balanced take on stuff, because like I said, I'm not like anti-AI in the sense that like, screw all AI. I hate tech. Like, I'm a huge techie.
Because there's some cool, you could easily just bring up, there's some cool techniques that some 3D people have been using. It's like, hey, I'm blocking out my my room in 3D, and then the render of using AI makes it so much faster, and it's like based off my lighting I'm telling it to do. It's like kind of some control, some interesting stuff.
So there's there's always the ethics and the data set questions with those sorts of things, which are always going to come up until we have ethical data sets and training. So that's always a concern, but there are valid uses for AI that don't need to be generative or don't need to step on people's toes or do anything. Like we said, like UVs would be great. Photoshop in the AI neural filter section has a depth map thing. So you could do a depth blur, but you can also export the depth map. And I know on GitHub, I've seen a depth map thing too, where it's like, that's actually useful. And it's not like screwing anyone's jobs up. So you can take a 2D image that's been trained on a bunch of stuff and then get a depth map out of it. right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can use that depth map to do your, focal blur, or maybe, some, atmospherics and stuff like that, and so I'm thinking like, hey, like that's the sort of thing where even if the data set is not technically licensed, it's probably transformative enough that it falls under fair use, because a depth map is not competing with somebody's work directly if it's doing it from your own image. So that's a use case where if it is ethical in a sense or considered fair use, right? Like how many times have you done like an image, like a matte painting in 2D and gone like, man, it'd be great to have a depth map so I don't have to do these layers of depth manually, pain in the ass. So if you could export something like that, like a video even, do some kind of, projection matte painting and then get it. I don't know. Just there's a lot of uses, I think, for things like that, like generative fill, a depth map, doing UVs,
there's also like
checking your geometry to make sure you have good quads, or, you know what I mean? There's all sorts of, I think, ways you could really, quote unquote, accelerate your workflow where you're not screwing anyone or using anyone's work without permission, but you are becoming more efficient and you do get to focus on the creative tasks rather than the technical tedious stuff.
Yeah.
Like the tedious technical stuff, which the way AI currently works, most of it, the image generation stuff like that, is it's not just getting rid of the tedious technical stuff. It's getting rid of like the whole process. And it's like, no, the process is important. The ideas are important. Like, get rid of those weird things in there that are difficult or time consuming that don't need to be anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's actually a studio that I used to work at, Mars. And they were, at the time, they're like, yeah, we're pushing more AI stuff to speed up our workflows. And now I think they're like, winning awards for their AI, maybe like beautifying techniques and some comping AI stuff that just speeds up the workflow a lot for them.
Yeah, if you were to do like deep fake stuff, right? Like things of that nature, or if like you're doing replacements on people's faces to get rid of blemishes that uses some kind of neural net generative AI thing where it's not generating whole new things, but it's able to recognize things and fix them or replace them in real time or whatever in new, like,
or even like changing languages, like if you go from English to Chinese, Like
I think that's a slippery slope, personally. I think
that's what Mars has. It's like they'll because they have to make a movie and then they have to make it also for China, and they are able to change their lips when they're speaking.
I think that's a cool use for it, as long as I think voice actors are in the loop and you're not just auto-generating Chinese language with an AI. You know what I mean? Like I think like AI is overwhelmingly displacing translators, and like you can make arguments, be like, yeah, well, what we all can have translation in our pockets. Like, yeah, but it's also kind of shit, right? Like how many times have you tried to use that somewhere and it's kind of off, right? Yeah. So like I don't want that to replace translators and people doing localization work either. You know what I mean? Because I think that's the slippery slope you get to there. It's like, oh, we can use AI and it'll generate new lip syncing for 15 different languages, and it'll give us voice actors too, and we don't have to pay anyone for any of this stuff. Like I think that's dangerous, but I think there is a version of that, which obviously we sort of have, which is totally valid. I think that is a cool use of the tech to change people's lips and stuff like that. But there's also the concern of, are you changing the actors' performances? Is that ethical? You know what I mean? So it's kind of a push and a pull, because a lot of the times, actors don't want their performances changed. It's one thing to prevent someone from, say, blinking in the middle of a scene when you didn't want them to blink, but is changing the words and their mouth and expression, is that a valid use? Does that change in the performance too much? Is that altering the art?
They have no say over it, though. I don't think they have any say over that. I think.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. It's like, because if you could start doing that, then how long before you're fully generating stuff, right? Yeah. So as a tool, yeah, cool. But when you get into the full generation, it's like, at what cost? Like, what happens 10 years from now if you start to box out all the talent, right? And then you start to realize, oh, maybe we needed those people because everything we have now is worse than it was. And then those people aren't around anymore. They've moved on, or you don't have new actors or new artists that are up and coming that are working on these things that have those abilities anymore because you screwed them 10 years ago. And now all of a sudden you need them back. What do you do? Are we stuck with it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
just a lot of existential questions.
There's a lot of things we can talk all day about this.
Yeah.
Might
it
have
takes
to
up
have
a
you.
lot of my time and
Yeah.
thought process.
Yeah.
Like it's
I mean,
there's
because
a
there's
low
also
level
like,
anxiety.
I can bring up like other questions to combat that more or something like what would the other guy respond for that, but like I gotta get to your work. let's talk about your work and
just edit it all out.
No, this is really great talking about this AI stuff. We'll have to maybe do like another like debate or part 2 or something, because
or we could dive deeper into some of the specifics and stuff. We can kind of go through some of the more of the things that I know and the things that I've done and the landscape out there too, even if it's not like a debate, because we've talked sort of philosophically a little bit here in industry stuff, but we could go into more specifics for sure.
Yeah, no, that'd be cool. So, so let's move on to the ATMO site and your work. And this is the website that I've created. I've been worked on for several years. And since this whole AI thing actually happened, I've put some protections on the site for anti-scraping and web crawling. And there's also a report AI button for uploading.
I saw that, yeah.
So now I did actually just recently think about, since if things do get out of hand, and AI is just everywhere, maybe the only thing I'll have to be able to do would just create another page. So if you see up here, up at the top, it has environments and FX, and I'm expanding it to other departments as well. So soon it's gonna be characters and creatures, and they're just basically, it's another web page. It's just separate from, like, the effect stuff won't show up on the environment page, and creatures won't show up in environment, et cetera, et cetera. So I could, I guess, say just AI, and if they want a place to be, they could just put all their AI stuff in there, and it won't infiltrate all the other stuff.
I think that's a slippery slope. I think once you open it up to that, that's all your platform is going to become.
Yeah, but then how do I, because AI, eventually could get so good that it's gonna be hard to report AI. It's like the hardest thing. Like, how do you, like, because you're seeing what's happening on Pinterest, and ArtStation. You're like, okay, well, if someone signs up for my site, how am I gonna? I guess I have to look at their LinkedIn, but
that's the problem. It becomes sort of like a little bit of guesswork, because you might have suspicions or it might be obvious to you, but you don't want to catch people in the crossfire who didn't use it that you might think did, right?
Exactly.
So
yeah,
that's tricky because, like, as they say, it takes significantly more energy to refute bullshit than it does to generate it. So someone could generate a bunch of stuff, but your ability to spend the time to go and look for it and identify it and be certain, that's tough. That's why they have automated tools to do it, which also have their own faults and problems. So I don't know. That's a tricky one.
Yeah, currently, so you went through the ATMO senior approval process where it's like, it's actually a vote on the back end, but I knew you, so I just go and do it myself for approval. And so now you can vote for approval of senior artwork. So that's one way to maybe filter, you want to just kind of deter things. So
I think that's actually really cool. It's sort of a community-based way to sort of let the cream rise to the top a little bit, and that will naturally, ideally, hopefully filter out a lot of the AI stuff if it ends up on there.
Yeah. So as you can see, I have it. This is great. We were talking about how the industry is so crappy. And this could be a great place for recruiters to find artists, because if they need, like, say, a mid artist, they can just quickly, click on the mid artists and they'll find, whoever is a mid artist, whatever. Then you go to senior.
I don't think I've ever seen any other sites that have that sort of setup. And I think that's actually pretty brilliant in terms of, art directors and production designers and so forth being able to find what they're looking for a little bit easier, rather than sort of shuffling through stuff that's not categorized by skill necessarily.
Yeah, no, I was trying to. So I got sick. Personally, I got sick and tired of ArtStation. When I look at it and open up their site, it's like I get an aneurysm in my brain. It's like, it's just too much.
I don't go on there, and it's like a sensory overload. Not even like ignoring all the AI crap going on with ArtStation. Like, it's just like, oh my God, I I very rarely go on it the way I used to, which is a shame. I used to like ArtStation a lot.
No, same. I'm in the exact same position. It's like I go on there, I'm like, ugh, I just wanted to look for matte painters and some environment artists. It's just like you can't find anything. And then when you try the filter system, it's like I go into the matte painting section and it's just all concept art. I'm just like, what's going on?
I think what happens is that when a platform gets too big and just anyone can sign up for it, eventually that's going to happen. And I don't know if there's any real way to avoid it without some kind of stopgap or barrier or some sort of exclusivity, or some sort of like what you have, the idea that you could vote people up, I think is kind of an interesting way to sort of combat some of that stuff that goes on.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're a senior, you know what you're doing. Like, you know what a matte painting is. You know what a character, you know what the differences are. I don't do it, the voting for anyone else, for any other level. It's just a senior. And basically, I think I have it at 3 votes to work. I think I'm still playing around with it. It's not, once it gets bigger and more popular, I'll have to play with it more and adjust stuff.
No, I think it's a really cool way to go about it for sure. Like I said, I've never seen that before, and I was like, oh, I like that. Cool. I'm not someone who hires people, right? But I could see where that would be very useful.
Cool. And then you also
just looking for stuff too. Like, I've been in positions where I've had to recommend people. I've also been in positions where I've had to recommend for hiring, even though I'm not hiring myself. So like I think that's a great way to sort people, based on what your budget is or what your needs might be, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you like it. That's great to hear.
No, it's cool. I like it a lot.
And it's also going to be the same because I'm actually in the middle of building a marketplace. And so you'll be able to do the same thing for the marketplace if you want to filter it through different experience levels of who's selling what. And so then you'll know that, like, okay, this guy's giving us super experienced tips, but that doesn't mean that a junior doesn't have like a great tool that you could use. I'm just saying you can, if you want to filter it more inside of a marketplace, that's helpful as well.
More of a surefire thing, because like I think we're all familiar with purchasing tutorials on Gumroad and finding out this person's very good at art, can't teach it all though. Right? Like it's like sometimes you just don't really get out of it what you thought you were going to,
or it's not industry standard.
Yeah,
or something.
So like generally speaking, I don't think I've ever regretted buying any courses or any tutorials and stuff like that, because there's always something to glean from them. Even if it takes 2 hours, there's always some good nuggets and stuff in there. But it would be nice on a platform to be able to separate it based on skill level, because you're more likely to find someone who knows what they're talking about if you're looking at senior artist tutorials or projects or models or whatever it is they might be selling, and knowing that you're more likely to get quality. Might not always, but like much better bet for sure.
Yeah. And also another little feature is that we have an open to feedback. So the reason why now you have a blue check mark on your name is that when, let's say I just click on open to feedback. I'm in senior work. I don't think I have any seniors open to feedback, do I? Okay, apparently I do. You'll see this next to open to feedback. And
it's cool.
So that means that people really want feedback, right? So they're just like, hey, tell me something, be harsh, be critical, or be nice, whatever. They're just looking for feedback instead of unwanted feedback, right?
Oh, and I see you can comment with a drawing too. Yeah, so if you like do like a markup or something.
Exactly. So if you do that, you can just click on the comments with markup. You can say, hey, cool job, or this area is great, or whatever, right? So, and then you can post markup.
That's pretty sweet. I like that a lot.
Cool. And another thing, remember I mentioned last night that there's a button that I was wondering if you've noticed. Did you notice the button on the page?
I don't know if I did.
It's down here, called View Black and White.
Oh, I did notice that. You know what, though? I didn't click it because I was busy uploading stuff, and I told myself, click that.
Yeah, so if I click on it, you get all the values.
That's genius.
So yeah, you don't get on so I have automatic video play on the stuff as well, which you can see right here. Someone's playing there automatically. I got to put on loop, but that's another little feature. But yeah, so even if you click on the image, you got the black and white that you can zoom into and make it black and white, and and check it out, because I want this place to be, a place where people can learn from and help each other out and everything.
It's funny because like I kind of take it for granted because it's second nature for me. But you know how you can in Photoshop set up the proof to show you black and white version of your image?
Yes, I use that all the time.
So Control Y, I hit that constantly, like all the time to check my values. Yeah. And it becomes such second nature. I don't even think about it. It just happens while I'm working. You know what I mean? Without even a second thought. And so like it becomes such like, I don't want to say a crutch because it's a tool, right? Like it's important to be able to do that. But like, it's funny because when you look at stuff elsewhere on the internet, you don't have the ability to do that easily with other artwork and stuff, which would be beneficial outside of like a Photoshop environment of a quick toggle. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, no, it's like understanding values is the most important thing. That's one of the fundamentals and foundations that we were talking about before. Like you can't make something unless you know get that part working correctly.
Well, as they say, and if you've ever experimented with a little bit, it's the values that are going to be more important to your read than anything else.
Yeah,
you can have all sorts of wacky colors, and maybe it looks like shit still, but if the values are good, it'll still read. Whereas if your values are terrible but your colors are good, it's not really going to matter so much.
Yeah, I mean that's apparently it turns off and then goes. Oh, that's interesting. So okay, you can still. There's a little bug there if it's already on, but you can always turn it back on.
Toggle again. Yeah.
So yeah, that is the site where it's just, it's all environments, and there's a, product section currently. That's not the actual marketplace. That's just my own little products up there. I have a DMP exporter. I recently actually added a donate. I actually added that, I think last week. And because I need some help. This is all out of pocket. So any help out there, you guys watching this, please support. That would be great. Really appreciated. I need to beef up the servers and stuff. And I'm actually currently working on art drop features on the site, because apparently ArtStation's not doing that anymore, was what I'm hearing. So yeah, move on over to
bummer.
Yeah, move on over to ATMO and get your art drops going. So I'm building some stuff up for that. That'll be coming soon. And yeah, let's check out your work. So Reid. Yeah, I got some cool things lined up for the creature character stuff. It's looking really neat over there on that site.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Let's turn off the black and white. So yeah, here you go. This is your portfolio. It looks sick. You got the Matrix.
Some of it anyways, but yeah, thanks.
You got the Matrix, The Woman King, Jupiter Ascending, The Hunger Games, Blue Beetle, Transformers, Independence. So you say that you're a matte painter. Do you have matte paintings in here? I didn't.
It's interesting. So my first film gig ever was matte painting. And that was pre-Hunger Games. My first big film gig was the Hunger Games. And I worked on that starting in May of 2011. Before that, though, I had other sort of film work in the form of matte painting. And my first ever film was, I believe I worked on 2009, was called High School, which is a stoner comedy. And so I did matte painting for the backgrounds and some aspects of that sort of early on. And so outside of the film work, I do work for like VisFX Studios on occasion doing matte painting stuff, frequently for like advertisements and TV stuff, usually a lot of the time. So I don't have a lot of film matte painting work, but I've had matte painting work in like a number, I think like 3 Super Bowl ads now and a bunch of other ads and things of that nature. So the matte painting stuff is a bit of a side gig. It's kind of like I like doing that work when the film stuff isn't happening, but I use those and employ a lot of those techniques directly in my concept work. So a lot of the concept work isn't brought up to full matte painting quality a lot of the time because you just don't have the time for it. But those are like the techniques that I use. Like,
yeah, I can tell that you're using, a lot of generalists, and the values and colors are all matching well in your paintings.
Thank you.
So let's check out this piece right here. That's a cool thumbnail. So let's just go into there. Transformers: The Last Night. So are you it looks like you use a bunch of 3D as well.
Yeah. So this is a bit older. What does it say? 2016 on it. So this one, who did the ship design? I think it might be Rob Woodruff Jr., if I'm not mistaken. So he did the ship design for this, but this is actually, so I live in Michigan, and this is actually a set in Detroit at what's called the Packard plant. And so that was the first time I actually ever got to work on a movie in Michigan. I usually either work remotely from Michigan than a movie going on somewhere else, or I fly out for it. So this one, I only had to drive about 20 minutes to work each day.
That's cool.
So this was an actual location. And so we had like a 3D SketchUp model and stuff like that. And then the 3D model for the ship and all these other things. And so I was kind of compiling and putting together and trying to put together sort of this narrative moment for this scene at this plant and stuff like that with these kids. At that point, I didn't really know exactly what was going on. I hadn't read the script or anything like that. And I wasn't on the project for super long either. But yeah, so this was like the main scene that I worked on for this. And there's only a couple of shots of this specifically, but I spent a bit of time in there sort of moving around and experimenting. And so ended up with only a couple of shots, which happens a lot. Like for Jupiter Ascending, I spent months on one particular set, and the end result is like one keyframe.
Yeah, that like you'll work on this huge ass matte painting that's amazing. It's on the screen for 2 seconds.
Oh, it happens all the time. All the time. You're like, I did that. Oh, it's gone.
Yeah, I'm like, wife, did you see that? What? I missed it. Damn it.
It's wild. Yeah, you'll spend so much time on something, and it's just like a little blip, and you're like, oh, that was cool.
It's so heartbreaking.
So you got the screenshot. Sometimes it's like a big featured shot, and you're like, yeah. Other times it's like,
yeah, nice little hero shot, camera push in. Yeah. Look what I did.
Usually, because I don't do the matte painting stuff so much. So for me, doing concept work for film, it's always a crapshoot, because sometimes it'll completely change by the time it makes it to the screen. Right.
Yeah.
Other times it's like dead on, and it's like, is that my work? Like sometimes you'll look at it and it looks just like what you did, which is always really exciting, but tends to be a bit of a rarity when it comes to environment stuff, because there's so many people it has to pass through.
Mm-hmm.
The set has to be built. You have to worry about vis effects. Sometimes stuff gets redesigned later in the process. So especially when you're on like early pre-production stuff, if you do stuff in those early first few months and the movie doesn't come out for 2 years and they've got a year of vis effects work on it, like sometimes your stuff gets completely axed or it changes completely.
So
I worked on Independence Day. When I worked at Independence Day Resurgence, they completely cut everything that I did on the movie.
What?
And not because like the work was bad or anything like that, even though I'm not super fond of the work that I did. But it was just because they cut the sequence, like for budget reasons, I suppose. Oh. So they just cut that part of the film. And so that work just doesn't end up in there, which, kind of sucks when that happens. But yeah, I think
at least you got paid for it.
Yeah. I think people in games are more familiar with that feeling of working on something for a long time and then having it canceled and never being able to show it. Right.
Yeah. I just had a guy on the other interview I recently posted. And he was talking about how he just, he left because they kept on, he was a concept artist for Riot, and that they just kept on canceling games.
Are you talking about Jeffrey?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he left because it was just it was over and over again. He couldn't even show his stuff, and then he's like, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna make my own thing."
Well, I've seen people that have been in the game industry for like 8, 9, 10 years or whatever, and don't have anything to show from the past 8 years because they by chance ended up on 2 back-to-back canceled projects.
Wow,
which is like should be illegal. Like
how do you work on something for so long and then be like, "Nope, we're not doing it."
Yeah, it's just, it's not working out, and so we're going to cancel it. And, it's just, I couldn't imagine having that type of work. Like I've done work before that I'm never able to show. It just happens sometimes. Right. Yeah. But also like sometimes the wait for doing work on something and actually being able to get to show it is sometimes 4 or 5 years, depending on, sometimes film projects last a while. Like I worked on the Alien TV show in 2021, I believe. And I think they just started filming it like a few months ago, if they're even filming it. I think it's supposed to film this year, which means 2025 maybe is when it comes out. I'm not sure. Wow. So sometimes there's a really long wait for seeing your stuff, which at least eventually you might get to show it. But sometimes like there are a lot of people in this industry who do really amazing work, but it's all locked under certain NDA stuff, especially for like a lot of big studio stuff. Sometimes, even if the project gets released, you're not allowed to show certain things because, hey, like we might want to use that for another thing later on, like big franchise stuff. Like we don't want you to show this design because we might use that in a future installment of whatever.
Do they ever email you to say, hey, this isn't coming out, but you can use it and show it off? Or do you have to hit them up? How does that work for you?
I think it's generally on the artist to inquire about that stuff. The general rule of thumb in the industry is that you're generally allowed to show your work once it hits like home release or like video on demand. It's not a hard and fast rule, and studios do get upset at people for putting their work out. Sometimes you generally should obtain permission though. But sometimes it's just expected that it's going to end up online. And if it's 6 months after the movie came out, then it's usually not a big deal. Yeah. I personally make sure I wait a good stretch of time before I put work up. And I also make sure that I try to avoid spoilery images for a while, just in case people haven't seen them.
Yeah, that's
just
true.
To make sure.
Yeah,
because sometimes you do something from a part of a movie, and you're like, it kind of ruins this part.
Yeah.
And like, I don't want to show that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like I mean, I've got stuff in my portfolio that I'll probably never be able to show, but I'm not too cut up about it because I got other stuff. But like, if the main meat and potatoes of your portfolio is stuff that you can't show, like your current abilities versus your abilities a decade ago, like that would be brutal.
Yeah. So what kind of you mentioned you use matte painting techniques for your images? Is this like we're using it on here? Like what kind of techniques were you doing?
Oh, sure. For this one, yeah. So some of the stuff is very clearly like CG, like the sort of the white brick on that building. That's really kind of unfinished and bad looking. But the rest of it was a combination of 3D models from like a SketchUp model, but also projecting textures onto those things in the key places from the actual set, but also taking photo elements because there's a lot of photos from the set as well. Photo elements and reconstituting them back in there. This one was kind of complicated. It evolved a lot, so it's kind of a mess to look at, honestly. But there's like a lot of photo work and texture stuff, especially with the damaged ship, and like the cars and the concrete and stuff like that. That's a lot of like matte and photo work for sure.
Cool. Let's check out the other ones. So I'm actually going to be adding a hard surface section as well for people to do more hard surface. So these are models that you rendered out and then painted on and just went to town.
Again, like not my model. I just want to make it clear I didn't model this. But yeah, so this was sort of like trying to do vignettes of what the damage is going to look like on this ship.
Was the model with a lot of damage already?
It had certain aspects, if I recall, but it wasn't like highly detailed in that regard. But it's been long enough. What is it? It's been 8 years. So it's hard for me to remember what the model looked like. But yeah, I believe it had like a section cut out of it, but I could be wrong.
Cool. And you can see how the site lets you upload endless dimension sizes. So you can zoom in and get all the details, which is cool. So I can see, you did a lot of paint over on it, which is nice. All these details in here is always cool. It's nice that you have the dark and the bright on top of it, so it's able to separate it from the background, which I think a lot of people kind of mix up on, where they just like, let's put a lot of detail, but they forget that, there's that contrast that you want to be able to separate images. Like sometimes you use haze and fog, like how you did it over here, to separate that from behind it with some haze. And here you just use a darker value with the bright. It's like specific strategies. You're not just aimlessly painting and doing stuff. You're thinking
stuff like this. Like it doesn't seem complicated, but once you start to get into it and you want to showcase certain things, you almost have to treat each individual part of an image as its own composition sometimes. Right. So like the ribs in there to get them to pop out, because they just kind of fade away in there. And that could be a look that you want. But if you want that depth, and so you almost have to take each section and kind of treat it a little bit separately and then evaluate the whole and then keep doing it. Especially for like big environments, like city stuff. I've done a lot of city stuff. And like that can get tricky too, to get your city to read and not feel like it's too much high frequency detail of all the buildings and stuff, but not also push the atmosphere so much that it doesn't feel realistic anymore. It's definitely a push and a pull game with that sort of thing.
Yeah, a lot of people get really heavy-handed with the atmosphere. So I always suggest to them, it's like, all right, well, make sure that your values are working correct, and then add your clouds and fog on top of it to so your values are still good in a good spot, and then it just only enhances it. But then sometimes they just get too noisy. It's like, well, look, it's just fog and haze. It's like, okay, but then now you're losing the depth, right? You're losing the
Mhm.
separation of everything, and then you're losing a sense of scale as well. Even though it looks like a cool effect, but the painting as a whole kind of gets lost when it becomes,
You kind of have to
too
like
much.
reevaluate as you go through what you're trying to accomplish. So, if you just want like a nice keyframe that has an overall vibe and an establishing shot, then, cool. But if you have something where you want a specific detail or a hero element to really call to you and stand out, then you're going to have to compose the shot a little bit differently. So you can
Mhm.
still use, say, atmosphere, but if you want something to stand out, then you got to figure out ways to punch that part up, but still make it feel natural.
Yeah, you did it over here too, where it's just like you have your solid piece, and then behind it, you have haze. It's indicating that there's a bunch of more detail there, but it's just it's
I think you know what I think that's one of the tricky things to do in the day and age of 3D and photo bashing
yep,
is you get all this free detail with textures and modeling and all this other stuff in a sense where you throw a photo in there, you do a map, you get all this free detail, but you it's hard as an artist earlier on to know what details you should keep and which ones you should let fade away,
yeah,
right? Because not all that, like, yeah, you want so much detail in there, but like not all that detail is important. And it's like when you watch movies these days and everything is super crisp and super clean, and you're like, this doesn't feel real anymore. This
yep,
is a real shot with real elements and stuff in it, maybe some matte stuff, but it feels fake because everything is hyper crisp and hyper resolution. And sometimes, like, knocking back details and a little bit of fuzziness or a little bit of blur and film grain goes a long way into selling something versus just detail, detail, detail.
yeah. It's funny you brought that up. It's That's exactly what I was going to say, because I think it just comes down to money. And the producers or studios are like, "Hey, we spent so much money. We want to see everything we spent on."
I fall victim to that as an artist. What they say, like, kill your darlings, right? Like, sometimes you got to let certain things you put time into go because it's better off without.
Mhm.
Right. And so, like, so frequently I'll spend a bunch of time on something and I stand back and I'm like, did that make it better? And then you look back 3 versions ago, you're like, oh, it's worse now. That all that work I put in that looks cool zoomed in on its own actually detracts from the whole image. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's you kind of get a feel for that as you do it more and more, especially when you have direction from people who know what they're doing. Like a really good art director or production designer who really kind of knows what they need out of something can really help guide your hand for those things and take a little bit of the guesswork out of it. When somebody's too vague about something and you're like, okay, well, I'll give you 4 versions then, you know what I mean? Which then it really kind of loads up on the workload you have to do when you have to do multiple versions of stuff because there's some uncertainty there.
Yeah. It's there's people have to remember, like, there is a focal point. Remember, you want the viewer to look at a place. You don't want them to go,
Mm-hmm.
where am I supposed to look? And that's one of the biggest things, especially when it's on the screen for 2 seconds. It's like, you have to make your point. It has to come across
Yeah,
real fast.
absolutely.
So this is Blue Beetle. This is pretty
Mm-hmm.
cool. Let's check out the first one. Are you, I guess all these guys, are these 3D characters as well that you're
Yeah, so
using?
those are from so big, medium, small.
Okay.
Yeah, those are Jama's. That's his website.
Oh, okay. Cool. So he
Yeah,
has
so
characters.
basically,
That's
I've ended up using these soldiers because they're really good soldiers for stuff, and they work for a lot of like military application stuff. But you can also edit them and do other things with them. So there's a lot of scenarios in which they work really well when you need soldiers for things. So
Yeah.
this is actually a fully 3D scene.
Okay.
The clouds, the sky is really the only matte element I would say in this one.
Okay. Well,
The
it's
rest
cool.
of it's rendered out and then painted on, a little bit of other texture work.
So if you look at this for what we were just talking about, how you need a focal point, you literally have lines going from there to there to there, bullets all pointing to this beetle, And so you're getting your point across, like, hey guys, I need you to look at this. And then you also have the contrast between the metal versus stone. So that instantly creates contrast. And these are the things that, I want people to think about. It's like, it's not only just contrast with, values, it's contrast with materials and color. And
like the arms of the bug, like trying to get a pose for that, but I put the arms in a way where it kind of loop you back into the composition. And it's funny because these are things that you start to sort of naturally do as you do this more, but it's a lot harder for earlier artists because like when you set up a 3D scene, you can look for your shots, pose things, and you get a feel for it. But like composing stuff like this just outright without having like pieces to play with can be really difficult sometimes because like there is a lot of validity to having a 3D scene where you can find a shot like an actual filmmaker might in those circumstances, because composing things, like you have to lean into like the happy accident stuff sometimes where like you find like an angle on something or something cool, like, oh wow, that actually looks really neat, I wouldn't have thought to do that, my camera ended up here by accident, and then you can kind of compose to those sorts of things. But like keeping the lines, like that's always in my head whenever I'm composing anything, is like, is anything leading my eye away from where I want to go? And do I need to tweak this image in a way that fixes that, even if it's not, like sometimes you have to do stuff to an image that it's not physically possible for your set or the environment or whatever's going on there, or it's going to change in another shot from a different angle, but it benefits that specific shot. Just kind of like how, when you do character stuff for vis effects in movies, they do morphs towards the camera, right? Like if Spider-Man lands or whatever, it's not just his 3D model that landed. Like they'll do muscle morphs and angles, so he looks really good from that shot. Whereas if you took the camera over here, it might look weird because you're morphing things in a way that looks good for that angle. And so that's something that happens a lot with these types of shots. Whereas like you'll put something in a position where it makes sense for that shot, but if you move it somewhere else, you'll notice that it's hovering in the air. Yeah. Like sometimes when like you put a character in frame that you want in the corner, like the guy on the left there's circumstances where they'll be hovering 3 feet above the ground just because you want them in the shot. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like, it's like a lot of the times, like you're designing for functionality, but a lot of times you're designing for composition as well. And you're kind of ignoring functionality for certain stuff.
Yeah. Cool. Let's check out your other ones. So many cool ones. Let's see. You guys, let's talk about city. You got city in here. Let's go to the day and then we'll go to the night real quick on that. Yeah, that's cool. So what was the story behind this? Like what kind of shapes were they trying to explain to you that they need? Like what made you decide on these type of shapes and look?
So there was initially some earlier artwork done for the city and some reference and stuff. And it was sort of, they were leaning in towards sort of like Miami, but also futuristic and a little bit cyberpunky, but kind of leading into that sort of neon 80s Miami vibe a little bit, I think, which was really interesting to do because like it's those lights and stuff, it's hard to get those things to work well in daylight because there's daylight scenes and nighttime scenes. Yeah. And so that's why there's versions of both, because it had to work for both. And it was a push and a pull between the daytime and the nighttime shots going back and forth. Like, okay, this works for the nighttime. How does it feel in the daytime? Oh, I might have to adjust this stuff or move these buildings to get that to really work.
Well, and you can see, like, for instance, the K, you can see it stronger behind the darker building, but then in the sky it kind of fades off.
Exactly. So there was compositional things where it's like, okay, this isn't going to work here. Can I move it in the daytime and have it look good in the nighttime still? So there was a lot of that. And I was really proud of this one, actually, because the shot in the film looks like just like it.
Oh, cool. See, that's so satisfying because it feels like it's your baby.
Yeah. There's been a number of sets like that. So like the Cord Tower, I didn't design that, but like that's the one in the middle. But the other buildings are a combination of photo scans and purchased like kit bash assets.
Photo
I think, like city scans with like drones and stuff. So just like if you look closely, some of the buildings are really lumpy and crappy looking.
Oh,
and I try to paint over those and fix those. But they work as a general read because you're not meant to linger on any particular building.
Cool. So when you're doing the windows, on these buildings, you're saying it's a photo scan or
So
3D scan.
those are 3D buildings. So those are like actual assets.
Oh, I see back here.
But then there's other buildings further in the back. You
Yeah.
see on the
Yeah,
far
I can
left.
see it. It's
Yeah,
Google Maps.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so like it works to an extent, but what you do is you get the broad strokes and then you go and replace things as needed or paint into it or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense now. I was like, damn, photo scan for these.
Yeah, this one was fun though because I don't remember which one, but one of them ended up in the movie. And there's an airport scene where they're coming in and they have a big advertisement on like a big LED screen in the airport. And one of these cityscapes is in the film, which is unusual. It usually doesn't happen. Like usually, because it turned into like a graphic asset that they used on set or replaced or whatever. Usually, as a concept artist, which is my primary job on films, your work isn't used directly. It's used as a reference point for VisFX and set deck and everybody else who needs to use it. So that was actually really cool to see that it ended up in the film because that almost never happens. But yeah, I like this one a lot. I can't take full credit for the aesthetic or anything like that. I did all the work for the image and the models and stuff like that. But there was some work done prior to me jumping on to sort of bring it home.
Cool. Yeah, it's really nice. Let's check out the dark one. Because now things get really poppy.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. I think the one in there's some night shots in the film of like the skyline that look fairly similar overall. Like I never compared them like 1-to-1, so I'm sure buildings are different and shapes are different, but the vibe, which is the important thing, is very similar. Because that's really what it is. Like you're not, other than the core tower, which is the big purple one in the middle where you're supposed to be looking. That's the hero sort of like hovering over the city in these shots. The hero building. So everything else is just kind of meant to support, I think, that with vibes. What's the feel of the city rather than what are the specific designs of the buildings? Like that wasn't important to my side of the work. Whoever built the city out and did the map painting and the VisFX, I think they probably spent more time on the actual designs.
Were you using for the lights streaks or the light effects? Is that actually modeled and used as a light, or are they photo painted in?
Yeah, so on the main buildings like that, basically selecting loops on the edges and just make them emissive.
Cool.
Which is a really cool way to make some of the buildings really kind of pop and feel more futury without like being too much of a headache. So like anytime you see those lines and those streaks and stuff on the buildings, I probably just either modeled a strip or just selected and changed the material on it.
And was the water 3D as well?
You know what? Yes. For the nighttime, that's fully 3D. That's just, I don't know if that was a normal map or a displacement map. I can't recall. But for the daytime one, I went back in and I put in, because it's more obviously CG in the daytime one, I went back in and put in actual photo textures for the water for some areas to sort of blend it together. I believe
Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say I like that you mess with exposure on here, so you have the blown out areas as well. So meanwhile, everything else is in or is exposed well. So that means these are like really, really bright. So it gives you like poppy areas instead of just everything being perfectly balanced, because that's not how a camera works physically.
Exactly. It's tricky to do nighttime city shots, honestly. And so like this was definitely a challenge, but I was pretty satisfied with how it turned out.
Cool. And you personally didn't model every building?
No, in fact, I did a little bit of tweaking and a little bit of modeling for some of the stuff, but most of it's like kit bash assets. Like some of those buildings I think are from the Utopia kit bash set. Okay. So the sort of like sleek buildings and stuff like that. I think some of the buildings might be from Photo Bash, Jonas DeRoe's site. But I can't remember specifically where they ended up. Like I have a bunch of different like kit bash sets for like cities, and I kind of pull from those where applicable to see like what might fit and sit in there really nicely in terms of the aesthetics.
Cool. And nice little taper off into the sunset or the darker areas, not as bright, so your eyes staying over here. No, it's nicely composed, nicely done.
Thank you.
And then you get the black and white version of it. Check out the values.
Some of these, like, that's the thing with, like, when it's very dependent on, like, color and light, like, it doesn't read great with the values, but the colors really help a lot once you use the color version, because it separates the sky from everything too.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they kind of blend together a little bit.
Yeah.
But I had another version of this actually with a different sky. It might be the closer up version that's on there. This one was more of an illustrative version I did, and I had a couple of versions that had more realistic sort of sky tone.
Where'd you find these little
so some
images?
of those some of those were from the graphic designer.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And then some of the stuff was stuff I put together. Like right on the left, far left, there is Peacemaker. It's the wanted sign. If you've seen the Peacemaker show.
Peacemaker show. No, I don't think I've seen it.
It's basically a spinoff from James Gunn's Suicide Squad.
Oh, okay.
If you haven't seen Peacemaker, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite shows.
All right. I'll have to check that out. There was another show you said it was Silicon Valley. So I have 2 shows I have to watch.
I never finished Silicon Valley, but the first few seasons I really enjoyed.
Cool. Let's see. There's so many. Let's see. Let's do. This is nice. More Vista. Cool. So it's all 3D again?
Yeah, so this particular set, it shows up very early in the beginning of the movie. Basically, so there's that big sort of rock, concrete-ish looking sphere back there that they get the Blue Beetle sort of emblem. I forget exactly what they call it, but basically, what results in Jaime getting his powers and all that stuff in the movie. So this is the catalyst to the superhero stuff in the movie. They cracked that. And so it's like an excavation camp essentially in like the Andes. And so this went through a ton of iterations. There was some passes at it before I got a hold of it, where it was much larger in scale and it was the daytime, and they needed to dial it down for budget reasons as well as narrative reasons and all this other stuff. And they had a location to shoot it at. So they were trying to find like what vibe would fit the movie the best. And so it went from like daytime to nighttime. And I have some early daytime versions too, but sort of blocked out all these tents as well as the vehicles and the equipment and all this stuff. And what I would do is sit down with John Billington, the production designer, and he would come in and we would just kind of find and compose shots together. And I use Octane to render, so it's very fast. And so we would compose shots together and he'd walk away and I'd kind of finish them up and we would discuss them and I'd go back. And so this set was a lot of fun because there was some practical stuff in terms of where it needs to be filmed and the dimensions, but also shifting things around and dynamically choosing camera locations. So this entire scene is built completely in 3D. I don't think there's any real matte elements going on here. So all the textures, all the lighting and all that stuff, other than like the snow, and some obvious post work and whatnot. So yeah, this one was cool. There's a lot of additional shots of this that I have that are kind of in a less finished state that, didn't really make the cut in terms of me wanting to put them online. But yeah, this one was really fun.
Are you able to still have that collaboration like you had with your production designer on now that you're working from home and doing everything through Zoom?
Yeah, it depends on the project and every production designer is different. I would say working on location is definitely the best way to go about stuff like this, because when you have a bunch of ideas for something and it's like, well, I don't know which version that they're going to like. I don't know which shot they're going to like. I don't know which camera they're going to be cool with. I don't know which lighting scenario. So sometimes you spend a whole bunch of time like doing options that you might not otherwise need to do when your production designer can come in and sit with you for 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
There's also like the back and forth where you might send some images off and might not hear back for 3 hours because they've got other artists and location scouting and other stuff they're doing. So it's definitely more beneficial to have that kind of back and forth sometimes on certain types of sets and images, because it's easier for them to point at the screen or ask for something and get immediate feedback on it. Zoom helps. But yeah, it all depends as well as like your dynamic with a production designer. Sometimes there's more conversations that need to be had, but other times you'll work with someone that you've got shorthand with and you kind of know exactly what they're looking for, and it's easier for you to hit those marks. Whereas other times there's more of a push and a pull, and more of a collaboration between trying to figure out where it needs to be. But yeah, being remote has changed it a little bit, but I've also been remote the majority of my career before COVID anyways. And it's just, depending on the type of project, sometimes you got to go out, sometimes you don't. Like sometimes what'll happen is they'll say, hey, let's start you from home on this project, and then we'll see if we need to bring you out. You see how it goes first. And sometimes it goes well enough where they're like, okay, we can continue working from home. This is going very smoothly. Other times it's like, okay, yeah, we're definitely going to bring you out because it's going well, but it could be better.
Where'd you get, so I could see that you used the snow as geometry over here.
Yeah.
So where are you getting the normal or displacement maps for this? Did you sculpt it or?
So that's the combination of displacement maps and sort of sculpting things a little bit. So some areas there's a bit of undulation in terms of how I've kind of designed stuff, but I would say there's probably 5 or 6 different snow textures I used. So there's some that have footprints. There's some that are just kind of chunky snow. There's some tire tracks you can see there as well.
Yeah.
And if you can kind of get all the materials to kind of sit together, the sort of albedo as well as the reflectivity, what you can do is just have intersecting planes on the ground, and they tend to, if the displacement, if you're working the displacement well enough, like it's a lot of trial and error to dial it just in, but you can intersect those planes and have them on top of each other and just kind of get them to where you need to be. It's a bit of a push and a pull, and there's probably easier ways to go about that to some extent, but because displacement maps have kind of specific requirements, you can't really do like vertex blending with it so much, at least not to my knowledge. Because the displacement has to be baked, but that was my solution for having all that snow, is just several different textures that just kind of intersect. And so if I want those tire tracks to be more prominent, what I might do is pull the geometry of the other snow down just a smidge, so it kind of comes to the surface, the tire tracks. But yeah, that's how I approach that generally, because Octane is really great with displacements. You don't need geometry for it. You can have a flat plane that's two tries, 1 polygon or whatever, and it'll displace it really nicely, even without, decimating it or adding a whole bunch of geometry to it.
That's interesting. I don't use Octane. I actually haven't tried it yet.
As far as I know, almost every other renderer requires geometry to do displacements with that kind of detail, but Octane I think I might be wrong because I haven't looked into other renderers in quite a few years, but I think Octane might stand out in the crowd in terms of its ability to sort of do really detailed displacements on the fly without needing a ton of additional geo.
Yeah, displacements is a bitch. I like just baking it in and just kit bashing the geo around everywhere. I'm like, whatever. It's just because it's, like you put the displacement and it moves up higher and it's not perfect, and you're just like, ugh.
Oh, it's a huge pain. It can be really so tricky. And then sometimes, depending on where the seams are, you got to adjust the mid-level, the midpoint on it, and things kind of like, and then like sometimes you just like, okay, that's fine. I'll paint out that crap later as opposed to getting it perfect.
So these geometry, was this handed over to you, everything modeled out, or where'd you get all this detail?
I had to construct this whole thing from scratch. So this is primarily assets that I purchased, I believe, or downloaded for free. I think pretty much everything on here I probably purchased, with maybe the minor exception of some very small elements. So all like the tents and stuff were purchased assets, the vehicles, the shipping container and stuff like that. It would have been, because this was mostly sort of a compositional and aesthetic exercise more so than design, because they knew that we needed tents and shipping containers and stuff like that. There's only so much you can do with the design of those. It's more about where they are and how things look overall. And so it was easy to get those assets and just sort of start composing and moving things around and figuring out what works and then adjusting them accordingly later. Like some of the assets, okay, the size of this needs to change. The proportions aren't right. You need to put snow on them. The color's not right. you need the doorway here, but not here, that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of that goes on, but finding assets like that definitely helps. Like mega scans for sure.
Yeah.
I use a lot of that for.
So when you added the snow on the top here, was that just an extruded face or was that a photo on top? Like would you?
So that is a combination, I think, on that particular tent of a little bit of photo work, but I painted into them a little bit to break things up. But what I did was I just basically copied the top layer of geometry from like the tents, right? And then what I did is I just kind of extruded it upwards a bit and kind of rounded the edges and just added a snow texture to it and just kind of warped it and played with a little bit so it would sit on there a little bit differently. Like there are ways to do that with like triplanar mapping and other stuff like that, but I wanted depth to it. And the easiest way was literally just to copy the top sides of certain aspects of things and then just put a snow texture on it and manipulate it a little bit.
Cool.
It's a little bit of manual work, but a lot of these tents and stuff are instanced anyways. And so you only have to do it a couple of times and then you can just touch it up in Photoshop.
Cool. I like that you have lights inside the tents.
There was a lot of playing with that actually. There was some versions I did where there's like a lot of light spilling out of that. It would looked really cool, but it was really distracting and really too much for this shot.
Cool. Let's check out another project. So Jupiter Ascending.
This was probably the longest I ever spent on a project, about almost a year. So there's a lot of work for this that I don't really have online, like unfinished design stuff and just stuff that kind of in my eyes looks kind of crappy. But I spent a lot of time on a lot of different sets for this.
Man, that's a lot of detail in here. Woo.
This is almost entirely photo bashed.
Okay.
Which is not the route I go anymore, but this was very early in my career when I was still using SketchUp. And I was like, I don't know how to do this in SketchUp. I know how to do this in Modo and with Octane today, right? But in SketchUp, I was like, I have no idea. So I basically modeled a tunnel that kind of curved. And I was like, okay, that kind of looks right. And then just used that as a basis to manipulate all these different elements into it.
So why wouldn't it, how much faster would it take to do it all 2D? I mean, or using this technique that you used on this one versus the say, are you doing it 3D now?
So the 3D would probably look more realistic overall, but you would also have a lot less detail probably. I think in order to work this up in 3D with this level of detail, because there's so many different technical components and modeling challenges and texturing challenges, this would take a while for sure.
That's what I was about to say. It's like a lot of duping or duplicating and stuff to get those quick details. But yeah, the photo, I feel like you should just stick with the, maybe you're doing a base 3D and stuff, and then just photo on top. But
well, this is one of those assignments where it's less about the overall design and more about vibes.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's no individual component here that's all that important to the image, but the idea of her flying down this gravity sluice is what they call it, sort of down this channel, is sort of what's the important thing here. There was also, if you go back, there's a prior version to this that they steered away from. If you go at the lower left, the bloody version, this one I'm pretty fond of.
You got
same sort of techniques, yeah. And then you got those big blenders down there. So initially, in Jupiter Ascending, the idea is that they're sort of juicing people and taking like, vitality, right? so rich people can live forever, and so like people on Earth get harvested essentially.
I feel like that's what their mindset is right now, like what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and so that's the idea here, but I think it was deemed far too graphic. Like you're not gonna get a PG-13 rating with that, you know. And maybe lame. It wasn't. It's, you know what? It's like a gore tunnel, which if you've seen the movie, I don't know if it really fits necessarily with the rest of the vibes, but I thought it was pretty cool. But I like to show this one too because it's like just sort of an alternate that just gives you a totally different feel for it. And just like, I'm a huge horror fan. Like I primarily work on like sci-fi action type films and whatnot, but like my passion, I feel like, is probably horror. I feel like they're two sides of my brain, right? I love sci-fi, but like horror, like, So like I've never managed to work on a horror movie, but if I get to one day, that's like a dream come true for me, because horror is like what I live and breathe daily, and sci-fi is it's great and I love it, but I've there's so much more potential, I think, for horror as a genre than sci-fi these days, because horror can insert itself into any genre, right, and make something really cool and interesting, whereas, you know, sci-fi on its own, you know, there's only so much you can do with it. And as much as I love it, like some of my favorite movies are like horror sci-fi movies, like Event Horizon is amazing, Pandorum is great, obviously, like Alien and Aliens, you know, sci-fi horror type stuff. Like,
well, I feel like now, since they do CG so much, it's like there's sci-fi movie after sci-fi movie. It used to be, you know, slim pickings, and it was such an event when a sci-fi show or movie came out. You're like, okay, this is cool. And now it's like so saturated.
I think it's getting harder and harder to do really good, unique sci-fi. It's all feeling kind of samey, and I feel like we're in like a renaissance of indie horror movies right now. Like there's all these incredible horror movies coming out constantly, which is like super exciting to me. Like I would love to get in on that.
All right, I'll have to check those out. My wife she used to be all about the horror scary movies, and she's like just not into it anymore, because she's like, real life is too freaking scary already. So ever since COVID.
That's why yeah. No, it's for me, it's like an escape. It's like it puts you in the position of some characters in a crazy scenario, and you're like, what would I do? Like one of my favorite movies is Midsummer. I don't know if you've seen that, but it takes place, Scandinavian country. I can't remember which one, Sweden. I don't know. But basically these like students go, and there's this sort of culty thing that they're sort of like observing because they got brought there by a friend, and obviously things go horribly, horribly wrong. But what I like about that movie is they keep you guessing the majority of the movie, because you know it's a horror movie. You know stuff's going to go wrong. But they keep you guessing throughout the movie of like, is it really that bad? Because like the cultists, they kind of smooth things of like, oh, don't worry about it. This is just normal here. Don't worry. It's totally fine. And you're like, oh, is it fine? And so like, I love horror in the sense where it puts you get to put yourself in the position of the characters more so than I think in other films. You know, like there's like the superhero fantasy. What if I was Spider-Man or whatever? But like being a character in a horror movie, you know what I mean? What would I do if Jason was after me? What would I do if I was in Freddy's dream? You know, like I think I think horror is just a very engaging genre, you know, and it shines a light on like societal problems and like people and just issues the way sci-fi does too. But I don't know, horror is very special to me.
All right, we got someone that loves horror. That is for sure. So are the girls being painted, or are they 3D as well? Or
yeah, so I think that is probably mostly painted.
The dress is really cool.
Yeah, it's, you know what? I would have done this back in the beginning of 2013, so it's been a minute. So I think I may have, for her body, I may have used a photo as a base and then painted onto it, because it looks pretty lousy to my eyes now. But yeah, so she was painted. The rest of the stuff in the image though is like matte stuff. Yeah. So it's a lot of cutting out photos and reconstituting them in interesting ways.
Yeah, it's cool. I could see you got a bunch from the churches, the Gothic.
Oh yeah. It's definitely the vibe they were going for. Is a lot of sort of, Gothic style. I don't know if it's necessarily Gothic. What's the word I'm looking for? It's been too long. Yeah. But yeah, there was a lot of reference. The server was it's really good stuff on there.
Let's check out the Matrix stuff that you got on that I saw in here. Unless is there something specific that you want to talk about in here in this one?
Not necessarily. I mean, I've got like stories about some of these things, but you know,
what is going on here?
So that's like a floating bed. That's the Alcazar of Kalik, I believe it was called. So this was actually how I got the job on the film.
Oh, okay.
I forget. I hate myself for this. I forget the artist who did this. They did like a pencil or a pen drawing, right? And so at this point in time, my only other film that I had worked on was The Hunger Games, like the big film, I should say. I worked on some of that smaller stuff. So the only big film I worked on was The Hunger Games. And so Jonas DeRoe is the one who helped get me the job on here. They were looking for people. And so they gave me this line drawing from one of the other artists that was working on the film and said, hey, what can you do with this line drawing? How can you make this set look? And so I was like, okay, I'll go for it. And that was basically what amounted to an art test, right? It was paid. Which all art tests should be. Yes. Never take an unpaid art test.
Yes.
I've had art tests where the person stopped communicating halfway through and I never got paid. You know what I mean? It happens. But so it was a paid art test and they said, do this. And there was another angle too. It's like, see what you can do with this, you know, and then we'll talk. And so I did the job and they really liked it. And that looped me into working with the Wachowskis and Hugh Badeup, the production designer, which really kind of changed the course of my career, honestly. So it kind of started with this image.
That's awesome. We found your little baby here. Back in this day, you were using more just 2D stuff, and then you jumped over to 3D, I guess, with Matrix.
This is all 2D because I was working to that line drawing. And so a lot of the details that I've imparted in there are like, you know, photo details, but they were all suggested to some extent by the line drawing. Yeah. And like way back through that opening and like outside obviously is like different photo work that wasn't really detailed. But yeah, it was an interesting challenge. It's not something that I've done to that extent since then and that sort of technique. But yeah, no, like I wish I could remember the artist's name. I don't think I ever met them. I was just provided the image. But yeah, that was working that up. I should actually look into that and probably put accreditation on there.
That's cool.
This one was my baby. I spent months and months and months on this one. This is Balem's boardroom, we were calling it, but it's kind of his main bad guy lair. So the one in the movie, it looks a little bit different than this. From the vibes are very similar. And so this went through a ton of iterations. And this is one of those instances where I spent months on something and really ultimately ended up with like a single keyframe.
Yeah, it's cool. I like this design in here leading up. What made you come up with these shapes? Like
So the majority of the interior, there was some work done really early on before I showed up for this set that they weren't really vibing with as much as they wanted to. And so there was some design cues with the archways and stuff from the reference and whatnot. And I think someone had done a pass on the windows prior to me getting to it that had that kind of vibe. And then I kind of took that and ran with it and just sort of give it this sort of like industrial sort of sharp feel to it. To sort of get that to sort of look out on this floating city, this basically refinery in the atmosphere of Jupiter out there. And then the middle part that's reflective, that's meant to be like a force field floor that opens up. And so there's a whole action sequence in the movie where that kind of opens up and a bunch of stuff happens above and below. And there's another shot that I have on there too that sort of shows the down below, which is where some of these like there's like bodies and stuff down there.
Shit. Yeah, this is cool. So this you're saying you're doing all photos, but I feel like there's some 3D in this, no?
Oh, this one was 3D.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was using 3D at this point. Some of the stuff I was doing was all photo work on Jupiter Ascending, but I would say the majority of it was 3D. So this was back when I was using SketchUp and V-Ray still. So that was excruciating at times because we're talking like 2012, 2013 render times were pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Octane was a thing then, and I had only just started to toy with it, but it wasn't in a position to like do what I needed it to because it was like a standalone thing at the time, I believe. I don't think it was like a plugin like the V-Ray was. So yeah, this was a lot of modeling and texturing work that went on for this one.
Yeah, I like the shape language on this where you got the curves and they come up and point to the top, and this whole thing kind of gets you down.
There was a lot of iterations on this to sort of get that feeling the way it needed to be.
So what kind of iterations? Was it like full on, like change everything, like move this whole column out of the picture, or open up this whole top space? Or
there were versions that had two sets of columns. So we have one on this side and one on this side. There was versions where it was much deeper and taller even. So it was kind of like, it's one of those things though that always happens when you work on sets for stuff like this is the question is how much do we have to build, how much is it going to cost, and what can VisFX do for us.
And how close was it to your actual final set?
It looks pretty close. It's in one of the trailers. I'd have to dig up the frame for you. It's not the same. It looks different. The color grading is different. The vibes are a little bit different. There's some different lights and stuff in there, but it's generally sort of in line with what I did, which was cool to see. It's one of the first times I really got like a good look at something. It was like, oh, I did that, which doesn't happen very frequently.
That's cool.
But yeah, so no, I spent a lot of time on this one. Who's the art director I was working on with? I think David Alday. He was the art director that worked on this set with me, and so there was a lot of back and forth between the two of us to try to figure it out, which was really fun.
The chair.
They built like the cool. foam core models of some of these things too, which was always really cool to walk over to where the art directors were working and see the physical models they were building of some of these sets, and kind of like, oh, stick your head down in there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that chair is cool. You came up with the design.
I didn't do that chair. That was somebody else's that I plopped in there. I can't take credit for that. Also, the refinery bits that you can see outside, that was another artist as well.
Okay, cool.
I didn't do all that stuff because it was easier just to pull something from the server and just kind of, because it's mostly just color and like stuff like that back there. But you know, like that's the way it is with film stuff. Is it's all collaborative.
It's just nice. You got the big shape. And then you got the medium shapes breaking in. Then you got these tiny ones everywhere. And then you still have, you have holes in it, but you have areas of rest. So because it's a lot of detail in here, but it's not killing your eyes because you're breaking it up.
That was the trick, was finding a balance between getting a lot of detail and interest in there, but without making it too messy. So that there was a bit of a push and a pull there for sure.
Yeah, that's nice. That's cool. All right.
There's other elements too, like some of the column stuff, like towards the top of the column, like someone else had done a design sort of pass on that kind of shape language, which then I sort of remodeled and riffed on a little bit. So like when it comes to most of this stuff, like when I say I did this piece of work, like just to be clear, like film is 100% collaboration with these sorts of things. And so like there's stuff, enough time has passed that I can't tell you exactly what's pulled from where and who may have done certain little portions of it or whatever. But I just want to make it clear, because I don't like to take credit for everything here, because everything you see is multiple people putting in a lot of work towards it. Like art directors don't get a lot, like they're not ending up with these images, but they're very heavily involved in these sets and the design as well. But they don't get a lot of the glory the way the concept artists do, because we get images to show of these things.
Yeah.
So
it's cool, Colin.
This is like an unfinished render. This was never completed because the design changed, but this is an idea, like I was saying, where it's multiple columns, and we're also down below that sort of floor that sort of drops out with the force field.
Yeah. What made you come up with these kind of shapes and to model this stuff?
Yeah, so there was a lot of like sculptural and like tech reference stuff that they really liked the design and shape language of, to sort of go for the aesthetic here. So it was kind of figuring out ways to sort of combine different textures and like mirroring things onto the columns in various ways, and painting shapes and sort of intersecting stuff and using some different blending modes to sort of just get some techie looking columns. Cause these are like the other columns where it's just several cylinders like this, but adding sort of the bump mapping and texture on there gives them a lot more depth and tech look to it without adding like a bunch of work in geometry. So it just kind of makes it look more interesting. But I think it's a little bit, it gets a little bit busy when you consider all the other design elements going on, which is probably, I think, why it leaned a little bit further away from that in the end.
Cool. Let's see what else you got. Check out the Matrix one, and you have that video that we were talking about last night too, that we can talk about.
Terrible low quality one. Yeah.
Were you able to put it up? Is that? Yep, that's it. All right, cool.
Yep.
So this is Matrix Resurrections. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. Let's start with this bad boy. These top ones are really pretty. I love this one.
I would say this is probably my favorite, my favorite of the work that I did for it. So this is IO, and this is basically an establishing shot to the new underground city. Mm-hmm. And there was some prior work done on the space, and that frequently happens where you'll have multiple artists take a crack at something because, you know, sometimes you want to see which one's going to hit, or sometimes somebody isn't quite getting the flavor that's needed. And so they pass it to someone else to have a try at it. So there was a couple of passes earlier on that were kind of getting there in terms of like the shape language and the vibes. But I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure this out with the shape language and the design and the BIOS guy and all this stuff. And ultimately, this is what ended up in the film. The establishing shot where the hovercraft comes into the city looks a lot like this. And that's one of the times I was a little bit like taken aback when I saw it in the film. I was like, oh, that's it. Like, you know,
yeah,
it happens so rarely.
So
and I was just really jazzed up about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, because it says a lot. It makes you as an artist feel really good because it's not just, oh, you did a good design, but you nailed the vibe and they just translated that.
Yeah.
Which is generally the goal of doing concept art and keyframes in the first place. It's just so much tends to change along the way that by the time it ends up on screen, it's often not what you envisioned, but it's close or similar. But yeah, so I was really proud of this one. There was a lot of work that went into this. So this started as the establishing shot, and then the other two shots you saw are basically, I used that as a flat image to drop into the background of these because the 3D model was getting so cumbersome. I couldn't have them living in the same space at the same time to get a new render. So I just used the flat image and just kind of shifted it and warped it a little bit. And so this interior is Niobe's Keep, where they have some meetings and stuff in the film. And so this was a fun, unique challenge too, in terms of the lighting and the tech stuff. And so it was really kind of fun to live in the real world of, you know, the Matrix movies and this stuff. Cause, like basically the way the production was kind of worked out is that we had two production designers, and one of them, Hugh Badeup and Peter Walpole, and one of them was kind of more responsible for the inside the Matrix type stuff. And then the other one was more responsible for the real world stuff, which was kind of a good way to sort of keep these worlds doing, you know what I mean? Like a focus on the different aesthetics of the two different aspects of the Matrix. So like this stuff was really cool to me because I really got to lean into a lot of like cool, dirty tech and metallic stuff, which is really fun and interesting.
Yeah, cool. I'm currently working on a lot of, can't say that, I guess. Yeah, I like these cables that are on the ground.
This is almost entirely 3D. There's a lot of like post work in Photoshop with some of the atmospherics and stuff like that. But if you see it in this image, it was probably modeled.
Yeah, it's a lot
or
of detail.
kit bashed. It's 3D though. Yeah, a lot of texture work, a lot of mega scans, a lot of displacement maps and texture work and stuff like that.
So when you're
like it was. Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I was going to ask, like, when you start out, are you doing little sketches? Because when you go start with 3D, I guess you could say you're doing 3D sketch, but you know, sometimes you can get lost in placing the things in 3Ds, and 3D can also constrain you and you get you stuck in one bit because you're like, oh, I spent so much time modeling and putting stuff like that. You know what I mean? So do you do a little sketch, or do you just block it out and then do a sketch on top to be like, or do you just kit bash and you don't care because you're just moving things around?
I frequently don't start directly with sketches anymore. I often go straight into 3D because I can visualize a space pretty easily now. But what I'll do to start a lot of stuff, sometimes I'll do quick sketches just to get it out and be like, okay, that's the idea. But frequently I'll start with a block out and get some basic lighting in there and maybe a few basic textures. And then I render it, and then maybe I draw on top of it, try different camera angles, move things around, like just blocking things out, doing like a big block model and just kind of playing with the lighting and things like that. It depends on the assignment though. Some things are more vibes where it's like the individual elements don't matter so much. It's about your lighting and the scenario and the keyframe. Other times you're trying to sell a design, right? And so it all depends on what the image is for and how I approach it. But a lot of the time it's easier to start for in 3D because you can get the lighting and you can get the perspective for free. And then it's really easy to sort of sketch on top of that and then continue with it and to sort of go back and forth between the two. But I usually don't start with the sketches anymore, but it depends because sometimes you already have like, here's the shape of the place, the set that we need you to figure it out. And you go, okay, I know what the general shape and the vibe is going to be. What can I put in there? And so you can start with the blackout. Other times they don't even know what this area is going to be, what the set's going to be, what the dimensions are. And in those circumstances, yeah, a blackout can really help. But sometimes pulling together some reference and doing some really quick sketches, even if they're just for you, can be really helpful. But it all depends on the assignment. I think it's fair to say that I approach everything a little bit differently each time.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't have a set process, even though I heavily use the 3D. Sometimes they lend themselves more to doing just photo bash stuff. Sometimes, you know, we'll just paint. You'll do a painting and then you'll add some photo stuff later and you won't even touch the 3D. You know what I mean? So I try to stay fluid in how I approach things and not be locked to any one process.
I want to point out that, like, this is inside of a cave, so the lighting is completely different from traditional lighting that you're doing environments on. You know, so you're doing some clever things where, okay, it's dark back there, but you're able to separate this building by making this one being lit. Because traditionally you think like, okay, well, the values get brighter in the distance, but it's in a cave, and it's kind of harder to do that. So you really had to push the light versus dark stuff to get some separation going on.
It was actually really tricky. Like looking back at it now, it's like, okay, yeah, that reads really nicely. But like, yeah, it was actually quite a challenge to make sure this thing read well, because like you do the black and white, it reads okay. It reads better with the color for some of the separation. But there's some stuff that needs to fall back, some stuff that needs to pop out. And I think there's probably things I could have done to make this even more successful in hindsight with the lighting. But there was a trick. It was tricky because the biosky is lighting the environment, but also I'm having to place lights around the environment. And then you have these columns of like city in there as well that are also lit. And it's like, you know, we're trying to show the hovercraft, but it's also an overall establishing shot. There's no really one main hero element other than maybe that main column, but that also doesn't have a specific design aesthetic that's really calling you to it. So it's kind of like an overall vibe and feel sort of thing, which it's kind of hard to compose for that sometimes, because without a clear focus, how do you light for your eye to go to those areas? And so it probably works better when it's in the background of the keep. And I'm sure like the composition of the final shot in the film, I'm sure is composed much better with the lighting. I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but
and all this detail over here, you modeling, like what kind of models were these?
So that was where I decided to get real clever, because the scene was really heavy. Because these are like distant elements, what I essentially did was I used a combination of displacement maps and transparency.
Okay.
So I think I was basically taking images of things and converting them into displacement maps. I think I also used, I don't know if it's still around. It was like a tool for creating displacement maps with like techie details and stuff like that. And so I used a bit of that in photo stuff. And what I would do is I would create a displacement map that tiled, right? Mm-hmm. I would just do it in Photoshop or use like an app or whatever. Like I basically different types of textures I experimented with, and basically would layer them. And then I would also use, so you have the displacement, but then also use and crush the colors, the contrast on a transparency map of the same image, essentially. That way, areas that get pushed out would stay visible, and then areas that get pushed back would go transparent, which would allow me to basically have different cylinders of texture nested within each other with different transparencies and displacements on them, which lends itself to having this sort of like oil rig tech depth. Like up close, it looks like shit, right? But from a distance, you get these layers of buildings and like little satellite dishes things and like just techie bobs and bits. And then you can put lights in there that have, you know, transparency on them that kind of sit within there and light the underside of the displaced parts. But then because you're layering multiple cylinders with transparency, it just gives you this ability to sort of experiment and rotate the cylinders and change the shape of things and have things pop out and still really catch the light in an intriguing way. Like you couldn't get away with that if we were up close by that column. You'd have to do a much better job. But for distant details to get this sort of vibe in there, it worked really, really well for that. A lot of trial and error for sure.
How much time do you get on this?
Oh God, I don't know. Well, a lot of the time you'll spend time on and off on certain things. So this from start to finish might have been like a month and a half or 2 months. I'm not sure between this and the interior Niobe set. But there's also other things going on. So sometimes you'll put a pin in something and you'll jump onto another set because somebody needs something. Or I went on location scouts while I was there too to take photos and stuff. So sometimes you'll jump on this thing for a week or two and then you'll come back, or you'll bounce between things over a couple of days. So it's hard to say how much time really ultimately went into it from start to finish. But I did spend a lot of time on this one. There were some really early sketches that were more 2D and photo bashy, and then stuff that got sort of into the 3D realm. There was so many different iterations of like the biosky and what that was supposed to look like, which was kind of fun to do, but also was all 3D and using different types of replicators and meshes and emission things going on. So
cool. So
this was complicated.
Yeah. So they don't go to you and they're just like, hey, we need this in 2 weeks. We need this in a day. Or
well, sometimes you do get it where we're like, hey, you know, we need this by this time. Like, yeah, there are absolutely deadlines, but other times it's kind of like, especially in early pre-production, there's enough time between when you start and when it actually needs to be finished by that there's no hard cutoff for it. Sometimes you're just done and no one tells you it needs to be done by this time. But other times there's hard deadlines on stuff. Like when I was working on Jupiter Ascending, there was one of the there's these vial racks that they have for these rejuvenation vials. It's on the Jupiter Ascending page. You don't have to go to it though. But basically that was a design challenge that came across my desk, and I think I had 2 days to design it because I think if I'm recalling correctly, they had to shoot it at the end of the week. And so I had 2 days to design it. And then all of the props department basically had to drop everything else they were doing just to fabricate these things because there was so much work involved in order to shoot it by the end of the week. And so sometimes you do have like, this absolutely unequivocally needs to be done by this time. But it's not super usual because concept artists like myself usually work in the pre-production phase. You don't often bleed into production that much. Usually once filming starts, the concept artist team is either done or it gets whittled down to just a couple of people. And so there's not as much going on. And so there's not as much urgency in the earlier periods because you have time. But once filming starts, that's when you tend to get some pretty fast deadlines, in my experience, where things like, we absolutely need this because we film in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So I know that you're doing a lot of it or most of it in 3D, but are you also doing the window lights and stuff with the 3D or just using photos?
So those, I believe the majority of those in this are 3D. I may have overlaid some additional lights.
These lights right in here and those lights up there.
So basically taking like city building lights and then crushing it and using the light part as an emission and then using the dark part as the transparency. So basically the lights are just kind of sitting in there. They're just kind of floating in space, whether it's against the surface or a little bit out. But from this distance it works. And plus it also helps illuminate when it kind of bounces back. So in terms of photo stuff in here, the sort of irrigation, what do they call them? The farming plateaus. There's a name for those, right?
I always aren't they like rice farms or something? No.
Yeah, I mean, I swear there's a name for it. Anyways, so some of that's a little bit of photo work. There was 3D version of that, and it didn't look very good. So I kept some of it, replaced some of it with photo stuff, and then like some of the factory stuff on the left, that little factory tower, that's photo stuff right there. But the rest of the factory stuff down in there was down below at the very bottom. That was all just extruded like 3D shapes, like displacement stuff.
Might as well just gone all balls to the wall and made a full final version of it.
It was so sluggish to work with. Like it was brutal. But what was fun about working on this though is that this and one of the other sets I actually got to use VR to do. That was sort of when I first got my Oculus back in like 2019, and I was experimenting with like Medium and Gravity Sketch. And so some of these interior cave stuff I was able to do in VR, which was really kind of a fun experience for sort of more of these organic things.
Sick. That's cool. I've
never really used it since then, though. I've been meaning to get back into it. It's just I need one of the newer headsets.
Yeah, let's check out this video that you have going on here with, let's see if I can.
So it's a bit crunchy, like we talked about, but had a lot to do with the time constraints and rendering it off. So this was there's an abandoned factory fight in the movie, and this is the second iteration of it. This space right here. The first space was in a much larger area. Initially, it was going to be filmed on location in at a factory in San Francisco that we scouted. And then they were going to switch it over to another smaller factory, which then ended up being this set. But then they took it to Berlin, and so they built it on a sound stage. And so the version of the movie is quite a bit different than this. But the brief for this from Lana Wachowski was that she wanted it to be like a jungle gym for stuntmen. Mm-hmm. So they wanted a lot of room and areas for people to do flips and all sort of action stuff. But also she described it as being MC Escher-esque, right? So the idea that there's just like stairs and platforms and all this stuff going on to sort of sell this sort of chaos of this, this environment to do some cool stuff in. So that's sort of what this is leaning in towards. And so the reason I rendered this out is because the still images are really difficult to make heads or tails of the space because there's so much going on and so many beams and platforms. And so I did like 4 main shots throughout the space, which kind of helped, but I also did a lot of orthographic renders to sort of sell the space. But this was, I had this done. I rendered it over a weekend and did the comping of it and stuff like that. And nobody asked me to do it. I just thought, you know what, if I can render this over the weekend and show people on Monday, it might really kind of help. And it turns out it helped a lot from what I understand. My production designer was very excited about it and sent it to the director, as well as I think stunts and some VisFX and some other people to take a look at, because it helps describe the space a lot more. I don't usually do renders like this, but occasionally they can be beneficial to do like a fly through to really kind of describe a space, because otherwise certain things they're hard to sell in a 2D format.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on here. So how would you, because you're trying to build something for them to build on set, basically, or in full 3D. So it'd be hard to, tell them what it's supposed to look like in just 2D with so many different angles and so many different things going on. It's like it's just so much. It's twisty, turny kind of stuff.
It's a dark, moody environment with diffuse lighting kind of coming through the windows and a lot of wood beams and slats and stuff. So yeah, it's all, if it's hard to get separation in there to make it not look samey. So that was a challenge. The earlier version of the set didn't really have challenges in the same way this one did. But it was, yeah, like I said, it's I don't always have to do this sort of thing, but it ended up being beneficial in this specific circumstance. And the set ended up changing quite a bit anyways, but it was difficult as I was working on and doing test renders, because I realized early on that it may be difficult to understand how things are separated, because you can only put so much atmosphere and haze and lighting, and there's just a lot of detail in the railings and the platforms and stuff like that. It was a fun challenge. But yeah, this one changed quite a bit to the final, I think, because they had to build it on a set. A lot of the, go ahead.
Oh, how, what I don't understand is, does she tell you where they're going to be acting, where they're going to be standing? There's just so much going on. So where did you go? How do you start in the 3D space to be like, okay, I want these platforms over here, I want that over there, but how does it look on the camera? How does it look like from the shot perspective?
It was kind of a back and forth. There was a lot of test renders done along the way that were shown to Lana and working with my production designers. So there was a lot of back and forth, not quite like this, remove these platforms, make this wider. We don't want 2 levels, try to do 3 levels. Okay, 3 levels isn't working. What if we do 2.5 levels? What if there's some steps over here? So there is a lot of back and forth on that, but really what you kind of have to do as a first pass is just kind of use your intuition and be like, what would be cool here? Throw it out there, see what somebody says, and then just kind of go from there. It was challenging though, because it was the thought process here is how many different interesting areas can I make for people to do things in?
Yeah.
So any individual platform, I'm thinking, okay, can people jump here? Can they flip under it? And then you go to another one. It's like, okay, how do you access this area? Can somebody come through here? So I'm not designing the stunts. I'm not designing the action. I'm just trying to design a space that is conducive to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Because I think what happens sometimes with these things too, when they do stunts and they develop that sort of stuff, is they'll have like a strict idea of what the set's going to be and what they're going to want to do. But I think in other circumstances, they're dynamic in how they design those types of things. Whereas the set's designed, they figure out stunts to do with the set. And sometimes the set comes first and the stunts come later. Sometimes the stunts come first, the set comes later, and sometimes they're at the same time. It all depends on like what the production's goals are, I think. Very frequently, though, the sets do have to be designed with specific stunts in mind. But this was a little bit too early, I think, in that process for me to be engaged with them. So I never really talked to stunts, but I know stuff was kind of passed off.
Cool. Let's do just one more and then call it a day. We've been talking for...
It's been a minute. We spent a lot of time on AI.
Yeah. Is there any specific image that, like, out of all the movies, do you want to check out?
Not that I can think of. I mean, you could check out The Woman King if you wanted to. I'm pretty proud of that one.
Okay. Let's do two more. I want to see,
Sure.
I want to talk, I remember these scenes in the movie.
This was actually a surprise to me because this building was only about 2 blocks from where we were working in San Francisco. And so it turns out they needed shots of this building for this sequence. And I was like, oh, maybe I can go get some photos of this building. And so I did actually use there's 3 shots in this sequence that I did use some of the photos of the building that I was able to go snap. But I was really surprised because when I saw the movie, I thought I was just doing concept art, but it turns out some of the frames in the movie are very, very close to these shots, which was a very big surprise to me because usually that doesn't happen. I didn't think I was composing shots, but it turns out I think either that was just the only way to really get the shot they needed and it just kind of converged, or they used the shot because they liked the way it was composed. I think in the film, this shot's done a little bit higher, but it's composed with bugs down below on the window washing unit in a very similar way. And there's another like reverse shot that's also very similar to the way the film turned out, which was kind of exciting to me because they showed some of that in the trailer. So I was like, no way. But that was just like, happenstance. Like these were fairly quick concepts that were done, I think, towards the later end of production, or at least there was 2 segments of production. There was a bit of a hiatus for a couple of weeks and then we came back, and this was the tail end of the first leg, I believe, where it was just like, hey, we kind of need these shots. And I didn't think much of it at the time. And I kind of feel like that's how it goes a lot with artists, right? Where you spend a whole bunch of time on something you really like and you put a lot of time and energy into it, and then nobody really cares when you post it or you show it. It's kind of like, and then you do something really quick. Sometimes you slap it together and then everybody loves it. And you're like, oh, not the stuff that I really like doing. But no, I'm really proud of these images though. Like they were a lot of fun to do.
And how much is 3D is in here?
I think this is like some Google Maps stuff, I think.
And the characters, you painted them?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's a bit of photo work and a bunch of painting over and stuff.
Nice.
So you can see like Keanu's face is in there, but I forget exactly. I may have taken some photos of myself for some of it. I can't remember. It's been a minute.
What's going on with these the brush work on?
So that is my not so sneaky way of hiding the fact that the cityscape was kind of Google Earthy, right? Because like getting this angle on this, there was no way to do it. So you just kind of like, you can see how kind of warped and wobbly the building is and stuff like that. So for some things, I adopt this technique of sort of using a bit of filter work and some clever blending to sort of mash things together. And like, it doesn't look great, right, when you get up close to it, but it gets the job done. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, we don't have that much time for this image. What can you give us that's going to work for us? Like these were fairly quick ones overall. I would have liked more time on it, but they get the job done. And I think people struggle with that with concept art, where you always want like really good images for your portfolio and to be able to show them to people. But as a concept artist in the film industry, or any industry really, you're a problem solver first and foremost. The production doesn't care if you get a pretty image for your portfolio, as long as the image solves the problem it sets out to solve. So it's very frequently you get the plug pulled on an image before you feel like you're ready to be done with it, and you have to deal with it. That's just how it is.
It's true. It's true. All right, cool.
It's you almost every time on an image they go, okay, we're done with that, let's move to the next one. You're like, five more hours, please. It's stuff only you would notice. It's just that final polish stuff that matters to nobody but you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the Woman King.
Yeah, so like I'm pretty much in the sci-fi sort of action world, but the Woman King was like my first foray into like period stuff, which was really exciting for me. And so I worked with production designer Akin McKenzie on this. Really, really nice guy, really fun to work with, really dialed into a lot of really interesting aesthetics and culture that went into designing this film. So yeah, like a lot of this was like keyframe stuff, but also did some modeling and things of that nature, some matte painting stuff. This is like kind of a rough matte painting. The lower half of the frame is something they actually shot on location, I believe in South Africa. And so it was my job to sort of extend the frame and put the city back there to see what it might look like as a matte shot in the film. So basically matte techniques, but quite rough and quick overall.
Yeah, it's good values on this.
But yeah, it's like it pushed me outside my comfort zone, which was really fun. A lot of people are like, like I'm going to stay with what I'm familiar with. Like we all feel that way, but like a lot of this stuff was a real challenge, and I really, really enjoyed it. Like all the stuff in this square was a lot of fun for me, because I got to do a lot of like figure work, and I got to use like DAS and texture garments and stuff like that. And
is that how you got the ropes on here?
So that was fun. They actually built these dummies, and they had photos of them on the server for reference. And I was like, I don't even know how I would even sculpt this sort of thing, and I don't know how you would get that kind of wrap on it. And so I found a website that would basically convert a 2D image into a 3D model, in the sense where it's like really rudimentary and kind of lousy, but it kind of gets the job done, where basically you just sketch around the main shapes and it'll just create like a bulbous shape for you, like a circular sort of organic shape. And it'll automatically project the image onto it. So like you could do it with like animals. I did it with some sculptures and other stuff for the show as well, where basically you just kind of outline it and you get this really lumpy kind of crummy looking model. But specifically for these sort of root mannequins or whatever they were, it ended up working great, because it really it lent itself to the organic nature of it. And what I did is I just boosted the displacement on the image, and it popped everything out, and they looked really nice, and I barely had to touch them up in post. I was really cool. Part of what I love about doing this type of work is finding unique hacks for like novel solutions for stuff where I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to accomplish that.
What was the site of it?
Oh, sorry.
What was the site?
You know what? I'd have to look it up. I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, this is almost an example of how you could use those like AI 3D things, if that's ever possible. Like, because it's always bad topology and crappy whatever. It would
be kind of lousy, but as long as you're not up on it, like, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I think, the way this thing works, it wasn't AI. This was back in 2021. So it wasn't AI or anything like that. It was just kind of a rudimentary tool that was kind of cool. But like, I could see where you could use AI in a similar fashion to sort of like just generating a model. Not a huge fan of, because they're ripping stuff from Sketchfab, right? But like, if you could outline something and it could understand the image a little bit better to create a slightly better model of how you're doing it, that would be cool. But yeah, so that's like a lot of this stuff is like, I find myself deep into texture work a lot of the time to get the details. Like the ground is multiple textures using Quixel Mixer and Megascans. The rooftop thatching was a combination of textures and photo work. Yeah, no, like I find I get a lot of joy out of doing texture work, believe it or not. Like I find it a lot of fun to see how far you can really push the detail and the look of something with textures alone and not having to model everything.
Cool. What shaders are you using for the people? Like a standard?
Oh God, I just manually dialed it in. Sometimes you dial it in on a scene by scene basis, depending on the lighting. I'm not great with like skin shader stuff at all. But like, so if you need people to look kind of hot and sweaty, you pump the gloss, you know, and stuff like that.
This is pretty.
This was mostly a photo bash, and then I used the horses and the characters on the horses are all 3D.
Cool.
Yeah, like I don't get to do a ton of figure work in a lot of the stuff I do. Like figures end up being a part of it, but this one had a lot more figure work than I'm used to, which really kind of forced me to figure out some interesting solutions with DAZ and some other programs to figure it out, because Moto is not great with rigging. Like it's just it does not work well when you try to pose something in Moto. So there's a lot of back and forth between DAZ and re-importing and reassigning textures, which was a huge headache, which is why I'm trying to switch to Blender still. And it's been years, but like I'm on that path.
Yeah.
Because Blender does a lot of that stuff better. Yeah. As much as I love Moto, it's kind of a dead program to me, honestly. Like I've not learned anything new in it in years. It's just I'm very comfortable with what I know how to do and accomplish with the Moto and Octane, whereas Blender, for a concept artist, has so much more potential. It's got all those plugins and tools that like I need that, because I'm doing that manually for hours when I could do it here in 10 minutes.
Yeah. So this is a good example of what we were talking about before, like where you have fire here, but a student will probably be like, put smoke all over the place, but you only use the smoke to separate the buildings from the background. And then same here, not much smoke, so use it, help it separate, use the fire itself to separate the trees and stuff. So it's like strategic. It's not just go ham on smoke.
Yes. Well, I think, in a lot of circumstances, less is more, right?
Yeah.
Like when you figure out a new technique and you want something to look cool and bombastic and like dynamic, you're like, let's go for it. Let's make this really pop and stand out. And sometimes, like chromatic aberration, I put that on every image I've ever finished, right? But it's the sort of thing where like it's on this one, it's probably a little bit too much to be able to hide the quality of the assets of the photos. But like it's the sort of thing where you don't want the eye to notice it consciously.
Yeah.
You want it to be a subconscious thing. And so like smoke and fire and flames, it's really easy to go really far with it. It's much harder to make it more natural and subdued.
Let's do one more image and call it a day. Any specific one here?
So that one right there, this was part of a sequence in the film where they basically create these like napalm trenches. And so they've there's this enemy encampment, and they set up these termite mounds that have like dynamite in them, I think. And so they basically they ignite it. And so if you go to the next shot, that's where all the mayhem starts. So it's like a 1-2, the one on the right there. Here you go. So that's when they ignite these things and everything's blowing up. And so
that's cool.
That was a really fun to do.
Was this a photo or 3D render?
That's just photo stuff. Okay. I'm not going and simulating stuff.
I've played with stuff like that before, and it's kind of fun. You're like, ooh,
it's cool. Whoa. Like, was it Embergen? It was really cool. Yeah. So like this was cool because I got to basically build out these huts and these sets. Like this is the backgrounds photos. But the grass, the foreground, the huts, the flags, all that stuff is all 3D.
Yeah, I'm surprised how heavy 3D you are. Like, because you'd think that most concept would be like maybe a 50-50 3D and 2D, or just a bunch of 2D. That's what you usually see, right? But you're going like full on 3D.
I just find it sets you up for success in a lot of ways because it allows you to be flexible. Like if you spend 2 days doing a 2D image and the person's like, hey, can we punch in this camera? Can we turn a little bit this way?
Or
can we
lower the sun?
View? Yeah, change the lighting. It's like you can do all that 2D photo bash stuff and painting on top of the 3D all day long. You don't even need to make the 3D look that good if you want to do 2D on top of it. But I found that it saves a ton of time in the long run if you take the time to set up a scene in the beginning. So you might chew up several days early on for a set, but you might be able to get 10 or 15 images of a set over the course of like a week and a half after that, after just spending a few days putting it together.
Yeah.
Whereas you hamstring yourself a little bit if you work only in 2D. And like it's in a state today in the industry where it's expected that you can at least utilize 3D in your workflow. Even if you're not doing 3D renders, you're going to be handed assets or asked to utilize something or maybe model something or hand something off to someone else. And so I think it's hard. You can get by just doing 2D stuff. Plenty of people do, but I think it's hard to get by without having at least a little bit of 3D in your tool set. Because it's just everyone else is using it. So like a lot of times you'll be given sets to use. Mm-hmm. And if you can't utilize it yourself, then you're offloading that work to another individual. There's someone else who has to set up the camera for you and maybe light it and then give you the render to work on, which is not super efficient for the team.
Yeah. When are you comping in the Z depth or to get the atmospheric perspective, or are you doing? Okay, so it's comp. All right, cool.
Yeah, so it's definitely a bit of using the Z depth. That's a challenge unto its own when you're working with 2D and 3D, because you'll put the depth in your image with the depth map and you'll get your atmosphere in there. But then you start changing things in 2D and doing photo work, but then you want to change the 3D model at some point, and then you get into this weird juggling game of having to recomposite all sorts of different layers every time you make a 2D or a 3D change and go back and forth. So like you can fall into this pit sometimes when you're doing both, where you create challenges for yourself that you otherwise wouldn't have had. You know, when someone makes a change and you've already done a bunch of 2D compositing on it, and you're like, oh God, that's going to break all the layers that I did.
Yeah. And
you just have to deal with it, but it still ends up being faster. It's frustrating having to redo things. But the idea with 3D, from my standpoint, it's a means to an end for me. I only take it as far in 3D as I need to be able to set me up for success in Photoshop. Mm-hmm. Like Photoshop is the finishing point for everything. It's how fast can I get this into Photoshop to finish it?
Well, do you deal with? Sorry, go on.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, do you deal with that stupid pixel edge where you have an object and you're like, okay, I want to paint behind it, and then you use the IDs or crypto map
and you get the jagged edge, and you're like,
that fucking one pixel edge that goes around the whole thing.
Yeah, like that's a constant battle with compositing stuff. Like working in 16-bit helps a lot. But there's frequently, especially if you're really crunching your Z depth or something else, you'll get weird edges all the time. And I constantly have to go back in and fix them.
Yeah.
Especially with you're using, material IDs or object IDs for certain things. Cause like Photoshop selection tools for that, they're not good.
It only works if you just comp and nuke. Like that's when you don't get those edges, but in Photoshop, good Lord.
Well, yeah, use like a crypto map pass. Like in Photoshop, it sucks because you use the wand and it's just not going to get a good edge. But then if you use color selection, you can select the color range. You can dial that in better and get a much better edge. But then in order to get that good edge, you're getting all sorts of other slop across the image and weird edges that you then have to go and mask out yourself again. Mm-hmm. So it never works great, does it? And in a proper compositing workflow, it goes much smoother. I don't know why in Photoshop it's such a headache.
That's why I started, like, one of the best things is when I just render out elements basically by itself in different render layers. And so like, let's say you have foreground and midground, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to render out the foreground as a separate element, and I don't have to isolate it with a selection or anything like that, and I can just paint right behind it, no edges. Just have the other.
What I try to do as early as possible, because one of the challenges is remaining flexible, right? And so I get these really heavy files that become cumbersome to work with later on in the process because I'm trying to stay as flexible as possible. If they want to change something, I want to make sure I can without having to break a bunch of things apart again. But once I feel like something is getting close to locked in or someone tells me it's getting close, I try to layer down as much as I possibly can to work on as flat of a file as possible.
Yeah.
You know, so if you're like, okay, they're happy with the far background and I've got 15 different matte elements back there, pop them all together. And then you can do that post work, paint on them a little bit, you know, any of that sort of polishing you need to do. And it's so much easier than having those 15 elements, all your clipping masks, a bunch of adjustment layers, little paint layers. Compress all those 100 layers down into just 3 if you have to. Like, that's always my goal, is to get to that point as quickly as possible. And it's also why every time I open a file, every day I work on a project, I save a new version of it. Because if I start to compress things and layer things down, I never want to lose the ability to go back if I need to. And that's also a reason I also save a new file every day when I open a project too, is because I think we've all lost files to corrupt saves before, where your power goes out or something happens or Photoshop crashes in the middle of a save. And so if you don't have a backup file, you don't want to have to redo everything you did over the course of several days, because your employer is not going to, they're not going to take those excuses. Oh, I lost the file because it got corrupted. I got to redo 4 days of work. From both a paying you standpoint, they're not going to want to pay for that mistake. And also, like, time is money. Like, they need that stuff. So like, I'm very redundant when it comes to stuff like that, but also redundant to my own detriment sometimes, whereas my files do become quite cumbersome in order to be flexible.
Yeah. The times that, you know, I've had where if I lose a file or it gets crashed or crashes in the middle working on it, and you lose 3 hours of work, you're like, so many times. Oh God. Anyway,
I think there was a James Cameron quote I think I saw the other day about like the advancement of like CG and stuff like that. And I think he said something along the lines of, it's gotten faster, but it's not gotten easier.
Yeah, basically.
I may have gotten that wrong, but it's true, because like a lot of these things get faster, but as you get faster and more fluid in certain respects, other challenges pop up, right? Like that's why like CG these days, you know what I mean? Like, it's not as good as it could be because of, you know, pressure and budget and, you know, people changing minds. But like, it's better than it's ever been because we've made certain things easier. But what that does is opens you up to tackle more complex things that are still difficult. So yeah, even though things do get faster, they're still quite challenging across the board for a lot of this stuff, which is sort of what keeps me alive, I think. Is if this stuff was all super easy, it would be boring to do and it wouldn't be fun or challenging. I think the challenge is, I think, what keeps me going with stuff like this, being outside my comfort zone, pushing to try to do bigger and better things. Once something gets easy, it's like, okay, what's the next thing? Because I don't want everything to be easy, because then you're not growing.
Well, there you go. Always want to grow and grow and grow and grow. Wise words from Reid. But yeah, we could end it there. It's been, dude, awesome work. It's been great. Is there anywhere people can follow you? Like, they can definitely follow your profile on ATMO. That's number one.
100%.
Come check out the website, follow him, like his work, and create your own personal profile. And another thing that I just actually want to point out is, someone commented on yesterday on it yesterday. It's like, there's a bunch of unknown images on the site. That's because the site also has the feature where you can upload other people's work. Because I wanted to build it kind of like a reference thing. So like if you see shots from films or photography or other ancient, like old paintings, it can build up that stuff. And so if you don't know the artist, you can put unknown. And if you do know the artist, you put their name there. And then if that artist is still alive or just sees it, it makes a profile, they can claim it and put onto their website, their profile. So that only ATMO seniors have access to that, because I want to keep it. I don't want just random photos up here. I want high quality, but you know, we trust your eye that you've developed over the years. So it helps curate the site some. So that's the reason why there's some unknowns on there. Like,
gotcha. I like the idea of having reference boards like that as a part of that ecosystem. I haven't seen anything quite like that, which I think is really kind of cool, because a lot of artists sort of wear their inspiration on their sleeve and like to show, you know, things that inspired them and cool things that they find or take photos of. So I think that's a really cool way to get insight into somebody's process and their mind when they're working on stuff and get inspiration yourself. It's really cool.
Yeah, there's also a folder. If you hover over the images, I'm not sharing my screen anymore, but if you're hovering over the images, there's a reference folder that you can say add to my reference. So shoot, I can just do that real quick. So if I went to, let's say, your portfolio inside here, I can say, okay, am I not logged in? So I don't have it inside. That's a bug I have to fix. So let's go back to the homepage.
I learned something.
Yep. So if you check out these, you get a folder in here.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Add to reference library. So if you're you can make a folder that says like, you know, Avatar or Matrix, and you can grab some images for reference if you want to be inspired by, or let's say,
there's the Matrix right there.
Oh, there you go. And yeah, exactly. So there's no unknown, but it says Matrix. So that'll be underneath I put it up there. It's under film. Where's that? Movies, movies, cool. TV. So you have stuff like that. And you got the traditional paintings. Oh, I need to start uploading. If you know any traditional matte paintings off of glass, you can start uploading stuff on here. And just
I got so many glass matte paintings, you have no idea.
Oh, that would be great to have on here. So that's the thing. It won't be in when you upload them, it will just be uploaded onto the site. It won't be attributed to your portfolio. So people will be like, oh, they won't think that you're taking claim of it or that you made it or anything.
Gotcha.
Like that.
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that. All right, dude. So yeah, thanks for coming on. It was great. What are the places that they could find you at? So you got ATMO, you got your Twitter. What is that handle? Yeah,
Twitter. Twitter's probably the easiest one. Just searching my name on Twitter. It's Rahl. It's RAHLL is the tag, and you can find my website through there or just Googling my name.
All right.
Cool. Twitter's mostly my AI hot takes, less art stuff, but you know, it's a good way to find me.
All right, sweet. So yeah, there's a Discord too. If you ever want to hang out in the Discord, you can find on the website.
I'll check it out.
And yeah, maybe we'll get that debate going with AI.
Yeah, stay in touch. We can talk about that for sure.
Yeah. I hope you support ATMO and get the word spreading, everyone, and start uploading your work up there. And yeah, thanks for coming on. This is great. Great work. Great talking to you.
Yeah, it's good talk. Talked for a long time though.
Yeah, I think the longest one I had was 5 hours. So yeah, man, cool. Keep in touch, and I am going to press stop. So thanks.
Sure.